I stood outside the club in a state of shock. Linda had left me for a night with Marc Lavilliere, the football superstar of our local Sharks team. I didn't know what to do, realizing that our marriage was over, and I would never be able to forgive her for the humiliation she had put me through. Dozens of people were recording the event, and tomorrow it would be all over the internet. What was she thinking? Did she really believe that I would forgive her and everything would be back to normal when she got home? She was in for a big surprise. I walked back to the hotel where we were to spend our special night and went to our room. A plan was slowly forming in my head, and it wasn't going to be pretty. When I entered the room, the first thing I saw was the evening gown she had bought at Victoria's Secret for our special night. As soon as I saw it, I burst into tears. The whole night came crashing down on me, and I collapsed on the bed sobbing. My wife, the love of my life, my rock that I came home to every day, the mother of my children, the woman I loved more than life, had betrayed me for one night of fun. When a voice I remembered from my time in the army came out and thought, "Get up, control yourself and do what you need to do to survive." I stood up, ashamed of my weakness, for I was beyond that. I had not survived 6 weeks visiting the Taliban, crying and feeling sorry for myself. I packed all my things into my suitcase, leaving Linda's things in my room, and headed home. I stopped by the Goodsons' house to pick up the kids, 13-year-old Tommy and 15-year-old Gail. They had just gone to bed, so they were still awake. I told them to get dressed and pack their things to take them home. May Goodson asked where Linda was. I decided not to make up a story and told her the truth. I didn't know where she was. She left me and went off with another man. May was shocked and told me this, and asked what I was going to do now. I replied that I hadn't decided yet. That was a lie. I knew exactly what I was going to do. It would all depend on Linda's return. When we got to the house, it didn't look like a house anymore. I told the kids to pack for 2 weeks. When they asked why and where Mom was, I told them the truth. Your mom decided to leave with another man she liked better than me, and I don't know when she will be back or if she will be back at all. I'm sorry, but I think you're old enough to know the truth. Tommy started to cry, and Gail put her arms around him and pulled him to her, then looked at me and said, "Are you going to divorce Mom? I don't see any other way, do you?" "Daddy, if you divorce her, it will be to her credit. She obviously wasn't thinking about Tommy and I when she left you." Out of the mouths of babes, I was so proud of Gail at that moment. "So if you divorce, I want to stay with you." Tommy stopped crying and said, "I want to live with you too, Daddy. Mommy doesn't love us anymore or she wouldn't have left." I hugged them both and said, "I'm sure Mom loves you both very much, but when she left, she was out of it." Gail, "Where are we going, Daddy?" "We're going to visit my Uncle Jules. I'll tell you later, but right now I have some things to do, so if you'll help Tommy pack, I'll be in my office." I had a few things to do. First of all, to protect myself financially. I went into our bank, paid off and canceled our credit cards, and transferred all of our savings into a joint account. I had my own personal account that I used to pay for birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, and a cruise I had planned for her. I transferred all but $20,000 into my account, which should have been enough for Linda for a couple months while she found a job. I wrote a statement transferring sole ownership of the house and its contents to Linda. I canceled Linda's country club and gym memberships. I then opened one by one Linda's media accounts to explain why I left Linda. I recorded Linda dancing with an asshole and posted the footage on her page. As I was doing this, I discovered that I had carelessly left the recording function on, and the entire episode was recorded right up until I left the club. It was only recorded on audio as my phone was in my pocket, but it was very compelling evidence, so I included it on her media page as well. I then sent the recording to everyone on her contact list, including her parents and sister. I included a short message. "This is why I left Linda." I also sent the entire package to the local newspaper and to the nightly Celebrities Behaving Badly show. Almost immediately, the show organizer called me and asked if I could prove any of it. I sent him the video and told him that Linda was with Mark at the time of our conversation. He asked if I would agree to be on his show, but I declined as I was out of the country, but he could contact me by email and I gave him my address. I then called my Uncle Jules in France, told him what had happened and asked if we could stay with him for a while. He said he was very sorry for what Linda had done and that we could stay with him as long as we wanted. The next call was difficult. I called my boss at home. I had been offered the position of production manager at our French plant, as the previous manager was retiring. I thanked my boss but declined, not wanting to move away from my family. Now I wondered if I should reconsider. I was fluent in French as my mother was French and my father was English, and I had dual citizenship. I had both British and French passports, so they fit in perfectly. He picked up the phone on the fourth ring and said, "This better be important." I told him the whole story and asked if the position was still open. He expressed regret for what Linda had done and assured me that the position was mine. I explained what I was going to do, and he agreed that I should take a month off before starting my new position. I said I would contact him and hung up. I then opened the safe and pulled out our passports, the children's birth certificates, and the $5,000 I had stored there for emergencies. I also took all of my army photos off the office walls, removed them from their frames, and packed them up to take with me. The next step was the most difficult. I asked my children to write a letter to their mother, telling her how much they loved her and that they would contact her soon. I then sat down and wrote her a short letter. Writing, "Linda, last night you showed how much you love me by walking out with your hero and leaving me looking like a ridiculous loser in front of all your friends. I say your friends because they all supported your game and stopped you so you could get away with it. I have never felt as much pain as I did last night, and I will never be able to forgive you for that. I would say I'm broken, but you know me well enough to know that I'll just go back and remake my life without you. I took the kids with me since it's obvious you weren't thinking about them when you left with your lover, and now you won't miss them. I told them about what you did, in a softened version so that you wouldn't be the bad guy in all of this. I asked the kids to write you a goodbye letter. I don't know the contents of their letters as I asked them to seal the envelopes. I told the children that you love them and that they will contact you when we get settled. Say, I hope in time you will realize what you have done to me and the children and regret it. I strongly suggest you see a counselor to find out what is wrong with you. Dee said I should forgive you because it was just one night and he was famous, and she would have done the same in your shoes. That shows you're not the only whore in the group. As for your statement, I'll come home in the morning like nothing happened and we'll carry on as normal. What have you and Dee been smoking? My advice, get yourself an associate, forget about us, and move on with your lives. I intend to do the same. I'm not mad at you, just disappointed. I thought we were forever, but I guess I was wrong. Obviously, I loved you more than you loved me, because I could never do that to you. But you don't feel the same way about me. Don't worry about the kids. I will take good care of them as they come first for me, but apparently not yours. I will make sure they contact you regularly so that you are aware of their development. I've taken most of our money to start a new life, so you'll have to find some work. I've signed the house over to you. You should have enough money to buy a small apartment in a good neighborhood. One more thing. Maybe you should ditch your so-called friends, because without their help, we would still be together. Just think about it. Goodbye, James. I had finished packing my things and was getting ready to leave when my phone buzzed. A text from Linda had arrived. My heart raced. Had she realized what she had done and wanted to make peace with God? I hoped so. If she wasn't having fun with him, then our marriage still had a chance. I opened the message and my heart dropped. It was a message from Shithead. "Hi, Cookie. I just spent time with your wife and she was good. See attachment." I opened the attachment with trembling hands, and there was my Linda cheating on me. I sat in my office in shock, and Tommy and Gail came over and hugged me. "Don't cry, Daddy. We still love you." I sent them to the family room, and then sent out the text and attachment to everyone I had sent the letter to before. James. When I had recovered enough, I looked up flights to Charles de Gaulle. One was in 4 hours, I booked 3 seats in first class, and we were on our way. The airport was an hour and a half away, and the kids fell asleep almost immediately. I was grateful for that, at least. I parked in the long-term parking lot, and we caught a shuttle to the flight. I left my car keys at the front desk for my boss to pick up later. It was a company car. I left a message on the company answering machine as I didn't want to bother him unnecessarily. When we went to our seats, the kids fell asleep immediately. I sat there thinking about what I could have done to avoid this train wreck, and realized that this or something similar was bound to happen since Linda was clearly open to an affair. Then it occurred to me that maybe it wasn't the first time, and were the kids even mine? I called my uncle, who assured me that there would be someone on the landing who could meet us. Then, an evil thought crossed my mind, and I went online to get Mark's phone number and found it on his Facebook page. I sent him a message. "Thank you so much for sending proof of my soon-to-be ex-wife's cheating and exposing her as the lying whore she really is. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking her into your home, for I could have stayed with her for years before I found out her true nature. If we ever meet again, I would like to shake your hand and buy you a beer. Again, thank you very much. James?" I reread my message and grinned, sure it would make him very angry. I was also sure he'd show it to Linda, and her blood vessels would burst. I settled back in my seat and fell asleep. I woke up to the flight attendant telling me to buckle up. We were about to land. I checked the kids, but they were already buckled up. I had gotten a good night's sleep during the trip and felt rested and ready to face an uncertain future. We unloaded from the plane, went through passport control, and headed to the arrivals hall to claim our luggage. As we exited the arrivals tunnel, I saw a man in a chauffeur's uniform holding a placard with my name on it. We walked over, introduced ourselves, and he walked us to the limo and put our luggage in the back seat. He said his name was Paul and asked if we were hungry, since it was a 2-hour drive to my uncle's castle. I found that I was indeed hungry, and so were the kids. Paul must have had kids because he took us to McDonald's, much to the kids' delight. Linda. I woke up to sunlight coming through the window, and at first wondered where I was. The room was strange, and when I looked at the man lying next to me, the whole night came to mind. Lying next to me was Marc Lavilliere. I remembered that night. I looked at the time, 10:30 a.m., and sighed. It was time to go home. I couldn't believe what I'd done last night, leaving Jim like that. But Dee assured me he'd forgive me in a few days. After all, Dave had forgiven Dee when she lost her way, really. She had to give Dave permission to do the same thing to even things out. I was willing to do the same. I still loved Jim as I always had and wanted to live a long life with him. But he had to realize it was just a one-time thing and get over it. I showered and got dressed and went downstairs. Mark had made us breakfast, waffles and bacon and coffee. We ate almost in silence, and after we finished our coffee, I told him I had to go home. As we were leaving the house, I noticed a crowd of people at his gate and at least 2 television camera crews. They were yelling things like, "Mark, this is your new girlfriend, and you knew she was married. You always hit on married women, Linda. Does your husband approve of you spending the night with Mark? This is the first time you've cheated on your husband? You're going to get a divorce? Are you going to go out with Mark again?" I was shocked. How did they know my name? How is this going to affect my marriage when this aired today? The police were present, and they cleared our escape route. Mark looked shocked and asked if I had told anyone where I was. I said no, and I don't know how they knew where I was. When we got to my house, there were other reporters waiting there, but no police were there to clear the way for us. We had microphones shoved in our faces and were asked similar questions over and over again. All my neighbors were watching, and it didn't help when Mark pulled me out of the car and kissed me in front of everyone. I ran up to my front door and stepped inside, slamming the door behind me. Reporters were peering in the windows, and I walked around the house, closing all the curtains and shutters. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Dee told herself. I'd have a wonderful night. And after Jim grumbled and I massaged his bruised ego, he'd forgive me and everything would be back to normal. Running through the house, I realized Jim wasn't home. On the one hand, I was glad for that, because I had time to clean up and change, so Jim wouldn't see what a mess I was in. But on the other hand, I didn't know where he was. I looked at the bedside clock. It was almost 1 o'clock, but I hadn't thought of the kids and was late picking them up. I looked out the windows. It looked like all the reporters had gotten tired of waiting for me to come out and had left. Sen! I drove up to the Goodson house and knocked on the door. Ron opened the door. Normally, I would just walk in, but he almost slammed the door shut. Ron, what do you want? I was a little discouraged that he was talking to me like that. Ron, I'm here to pick up my kids. Sorry I'm late. I got held up. You mean you're tired with that asshole football player and forgot about your kids? You're a goddamn disgrace. Jim has already taken them. He knows where his priorities are, so back off. Do you know where they are, please? I'm begging you. No, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. And he slammed the door shut. I stood there, stunned that my little attempt had already gone public. I went home and tried to think, and then I saw my laptop on the table with Jim's engagement ring and 3 envelopes. I picked up the top one, addressed simply to Linda. When I read Jim's note, my eyes clouded over and I started crying harder than when my puppy was run over as a baby. I opened my laptop and read the message Mark had sent Jim and thought it couldn't get any worse. But when I looked at the recording, I had to run to the bathroom and throw up. I was furious. Where are they? How can I make it up to them if I can't even find them? I picked up the next envelope and opened it. I knew it was a letter from Tommy, from his handwriting, which was uneven and poorly padded. Gail's was neat and pretty. Tommy's letter. Mommy, Daddy is taking us away because you don't love us anymore, and you left with another man, which makes our daddy cry. Why don't you love Daddy anymore? Because he still loves you, otherwise he wouldn't be crying. Daddy says you still love us, so we must love you too. But I'm not sure if you loved us, you wouldn't have left with another man. Why did you do that? You broke my dad's heart, and I'm very angry with you. Love, Tommy. P.S. Gail helped with the spelling. I put Tommy's note aside and picked up Gail's note. I was scared to read her note, After all, she was Daddy's little girl, so I opened the note with trembling fingers. Gail's note. Mom, I can't believe you did this to us. You always taught us that family comes first. But I guess not with you. You said we should always be faithful, truthful, and honest. Were you faithful when you left your father for another man? Were you truthful when you said you were leaving everyone else? Were you being honest when you told your daddy you would only dance with him? The answer is no. You disrespected Daddy, lied to him, and betrayed him. I no longer consider you my mother. My mother would never do such a thing. And since you are no longer my mother, I feel no obligation to love you. If Papa read this, he would be very angry with me. He told me that we should love you, as he is sure you love us. But I don't believe that's true anymore. Otherwise, you wouldn't have broken up our family. I hope I never see you again. And if you do, don't talk to me as I will ignore you. I hope you live and die alone and rot in hell. You are the worst mother ever. Gail. I lay on the floor and sobbed heartily. I was crying so hard I didn't hear the knock on the door, and when it opened, my parents, Sam and Sarah, were standing there looking angry. My dad went into the kitchen and my mom came over to me and helped me back to the couch. I looked up at her and she hit me, knocking me sideways. Sarah. You stupid, stupid girl. How dare you treat Jim like that? He is the best man I know, apart from your father. How could you humiliate him like that and leave to become someone else's whore for the night? I thought we raised you better than that. If it wasn't for the kids, we would disown you and sue you. But you are our daughter, so we will support you. Linda. How do you know what happened? Who told you? Jim told. He sent a text and both videos to everyone you know, so everyone knows what you did. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now. Jim is very popular and liked by everyone. Do you know where he's staying? No, I haven't the faintest idea. Sam! I tried calling his number but was told the call was blocked. Mom and then Dad tried calling with the same result. We called everyone we could think of, but the result was the same. Gene had cut off his past life and no one could contact him. Sarah. What's gotten into you? Why would you do that to Jim? Mom, it was Mark Lavilliere. He came over to our table and asked me to dance. Out of all the women in the club, he asked me and I went. Dee said, I could have guessed that Dee was involved, ever since elementary school. Every time you got in trouble, Dee was somewhere close by. Don't you ever learn? Dee said it will be okay. Jim loves me enough to forgive me when I get home the next morning, and we'll live our lives as normal. Girl, no man is going to forgive you for what you did, Dee says out of her ass. If your mom pulled shit like that, I'd bury them both in the ground, and you should be thankful I'm not Jim. Sarah. We did the best we could. Now I suggest you stay home as long as you can in case he comes back and keep your phone nearby. If you need us, just call. Soon they left, and I was alone again. My phone rang and I grabbed the receiver, hoping it was Jim. But no, it was Dee. How did last night go? I want to know all the details. Dee, stop! Things went horribly wrong. Jim left and took the kids with him, and I don't know where he went. Don't worry, baby. He'll be back. He loves you. He's just having a tantrum and sulking that you hurt his ego. So you had the best night of your life. So tell Aunt Dee everything. Not now, Dee. I need to fix my marriage. I wish I hadn't listened to you. Now I may never see my kids again. Don't blame it on me. You decided to have fun with a football star. You could have said no, so don't blame me. She was right. Of course I could have said no. I ended the conversation and sat back and waited for Jim to call. Jim. We arrived at Jules' castle just in time for lunch. Jules was waiting for us when we got out of the car. Paul carried the bags to the entrance and then got out to park the car. Jules put me in a typically French hug. Jules then walked over to the children. Welcome to my home. Please treat it as your own. You are very welcome here, and I hope you will be happy. He then led us into the reception area, which was bigger than our home. I spent many happy years here, while my father served in the Marines around the world. There were servants standing in line, and Jules introduced them to us. Last in line was a strikingly attractive woman of about 25, who Jules said was his private secretary, PA in the US, and I had to wonder how private. He introduced her to us as Yvette, and said that if we needed anything, she would arrange it. There was a short, plump woman in her 50s named Simone, who was the housekeeper and took care of our needs. But first, dinner. And Jules led us into the dining room, located at the back of the chateau and overlooking a large patio with a swimming pool. I saw the children's eyes light up at the sight of the pool, and Jules noticed it too. I'm sorry, children, but this pool is closed for the winter. Their faces clearly showed disappointment. However, there is a smaller indoor pool and you can see it later. I thought they would jump for joy, so enthusiastic were they. But but they looked at me for permission, and I nodded in agreement. They ran up to Jules and hugged him, thanking him. The five of us ate lunch, including Yvette, who ate very little. Of course, in France, lunch lasted the better part of 2 hours. After lunch, the kids asked if they could use the pool. I said they didn't have suits, and Yvette said she could see to it and would stay with them to be safe. After they left, Jules and I grabbed a bottle of his best red and 2 glasses and retired to the sunroom. Jim, tell me everything and don't leave anything out. I told, and by the end of it I was crying like a baby. I was ashamed as I wiped my eyes, and I was glad the kids and Yvette weren't there to see it. Jim, we French have very different views on infidelity when it comes to lovers and mistresses. It's almost the norm. But what she did is inexcusable even in this society. Have you decided what you're going to do with her? Said I intend to keep her for a couple of weeks and then divorce her. There's nothing I can do about her lover except make him look like an asshole. Well, if there's anything I can do, let me know. You and the kids can stay here as long as you want. I know Simone will enjoy spoiling them. Speaking of which, I'll ask Yvette to find them a school with English-speaking staff if you don't mind. That would be very helpful. I don't start my new job until a month from now, but I need to check out the place before then, and knowing that the kids are safe and happy will be much easier. We sat in friendly silence, me drinking and thinking about the future, and Jules drinking and smoking a thick cigar. When Tommy and Gail returned with Yvette, I felt no pain, just a warm, fuzzy feeling that everything was going to be okay. Tommy and Gail went off to explore the castle, with orders to be back in time for dinner. One of the maids escorted me to my room and opened the 2 adjoining doors to Tommy and Gail's rooms. I had stayed here many times, but I was still amazed at the size of the place, which was called a chateau, but looked more like a small palace. Jules was an old man and, being the eldest, inherited everything, while my mother had a generous dowry and should have found a rich husband. Instead, she married my father, a lieutenant in the Royal Marines. They were both killed in a car accident, hit by a drunken truck driver while on their way to visit me in Chateau. I was 18 at the time and about to go to university. After the funeral, I returned to England, joined a regiment of paratroopers, and spent the next 5 years in the army. I put the inheritance into a trust as I didn't need the money, and so far, I haven't touched the trust. I worked for one of the largest manufacturers of fluid injection equipment, including fuels, lubricants, and paints. We were major suppliers to one of the top German automakers, using our top-of-the-line products. Other automakers also used our cheaper products for the same purposes. My new job was to take over the French operation as plant manager. The plant was located on 15 acres of land and employed over 1,600 people. My new salary was in the neighborhood of 7 figures, almost 60% more. Before officially taking office, I spent 3 months with the current superintendent, learning his job. He would then retire, but would be in touch for another 6 months if I had any problems. I was fortunate that Jules lived only an hour's drive from the factory towards Paris. Thus, rush hours were in my favor both morning and evening, but it didn't bother me as I had a driver assigned to me to pick me up in the morning and drop me off in the evening. I indicated in my letter that I would make sure the kids contacted Linda, but waited until the following Sunday. I gave them both a laptop and told them to call their mother and let her know they were safe. Tommy said he wanted to go first, but Gail refused to contact Linda, saying she never thought of them, so she didn't owe her anything. Yvette and I tried to talk her into it, but she wouldn't budge. I texted Linda to turn on her laptop since Tommy wanted to talk to her, reminded Tommy not to tell her where we were, and sent a text. Linda. It had been over a week since Jim took the kids and left. 2 days later, I went to the police and reported them missing. I was led into an interrogation room where a female sergeant with a sailor appearance sat. I explained that my husband had taken the children and left, and I didn't know where they were. She introduced herself as Sergeant Mary Malone, then looked at me and asked if we had met before. I said not to my knowledge, and the interrogation began. Are you afraid that your husband might harm the children? God, no, he loves them more than anything in the world, and would never hurt them. Did he leave you a note explaining his reasons for leaving? I pulled a note out of my purse, held it out to her, and lowered my eyes bashfully. She read the note, then I think reread it again, asked if she could have a copy, and I agreed. She left the room for a couple minutes and then returned, handing me the original note. Now I know where I've seen you before. You're an unimportant celebrity. Last night you were on the Celebrities Behaving Badly show exposing Marc Lavilliere, and you were the married woman he seduced. I felt hot tears of shame streaming down my face and covered it with my hands. No. You probably think I'm a horrible person, but I'm really not. I don't know what came over me to do such a horrible thing to my husband. I need to find him and make things right. Can you help me? Linda, I'm not here to judge you. I'm only concerned about the welfare of your children, and from what you've told me, they're not in any danger. So I can't issue an Amber Alert. The best I can do is issue a bolo that says, do not detain. Have you or your husband filed for divorce? I haven't filed. I don't know why. If you are in the process of divorce, one spouse cannot take the children out of state without the permission of the other spouse. Otherwise, Jim has every right to take the kids wherever he wants, so my hands are tied. Bolo is the best I can do. If Jim contacts you in any way, please let me know so I can update your file. I was then gently led out of the station. I always had my phone and laptop with me. Even to the bathroom, I took them with me. I went to see a lawyer who told me the same thing as Sergeant Malloy, but said that if I could find Jim, she would try to get a court order forcing Jim to give me access to my children. I started following the media about Mark Lavilliere, and after the show, the phones were flooded with angry citizens decrying Mark's low moral standards and mine too. Among the callers were several couples who said he did the same thing to them and were interviewed live on air. Turns out he had a habit of groping married women in front of their husbands, and to ruin their marriages, he would send the husbands proof. Most of his victims divorced, and at least one husband committed suicide. This triggered an avalanche of calls from the public demanding Mark be fired from the team. When sponsors began withdrawing his services, Mark was cut from professional football with a generous golden handshake. His troubles didn't end there, however, as the attorney I contacted quickly rounded up all the victims, including me, and started a class action lawsuit for intentional harm to his victims. It was Sunday, and I had just finished lunch when a text message from Jim arrived. I opened it expecting a tirade of insults, but instead it just said, "Turn on your laptop." It was already on, so I opened it and a FaceTime prompt came up. I logged in and almost cried when Tommy's face looked at me again. I could barely speak. "Hi, baby. I missed you so much. How are you?" "Hi, Mommy. I missed you too. Why did you leave Daddy and make him cry?" "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry I did that. But this is grown-up stuff. I need to talk to Daddy. Can you put him on?" "Nah." "I'm sorry. Daddy said he doesn't want to talk to you. Ask Daddy to call me soon." "Where are you, baby? Tell me so I can come and visit you. I really miss you all." "Daddy said I shouldn't tell you, but we can call you every Sunday and talk." "Did you do anything interesting today? Tell me about your day." "Yeah, it's great here. There's an indoor pool and big double bedrooms. We're going shopping tomorrow. Dad is taking me, and Yvette is taking Gail." I inhaled sharply. Who is Yvette? And why is she taking Gail shopping with her? Who is Yvette, honey? Oh, she takes care of everything and makes sure we have everything we need. She's just wonderful. You would really like her. I know Daddy does. I felt steam coming out of my ears. Jim had only been gone a week, and he was already cohabiting with some slut, and I had to know more. Sounds good. But what does she look like? She's almost as tall as Daddy, in her heels, and looks like one of those ladies from your magazines. She makes me laugh and tells me bedtime stories and teaches me French. I like her a lot, and Gail likes her too, and they sit and talk about girl stuff for hours. I have to go now. Gail is calling me. I love you very much. Love you even more. Turn on Gail, Tommy. Gail said she never wants to talk to you again. I'm sorry, Mommy. I have to go. That was it. The screen went out. I tried to reconnect, but they must have turned off their end. I sat there stunned that some French whore had taken my family, and they were enjoying it. I wondered what kind of French this Yvette was teaching my Jim. My imagination ran wild, picturing Jim with another woman, and I ran to the bathroom to throw up. And then it came to me that I must be feeling the same thing Jim felt that night I was with Mark. Oh God, what had I done to my poor Jim? It must have been even worse for him. What a tramp I had become in just a few hours. I called the police station and asked to be put through to Sergeant Malone. I told her that I had been communicating with Tommy on FaceTime, but I still didn't know where they were. She thanked me for keeping her in the loop and said she would keep the bolo in place for now, then ended the conversation. I then called my parents and brought them up to speed. When I told my mom about the call and my concerns about his French bitch, tears streaming down my face, she said, "Now you know what it's like? Maybe you'll sympathize more with Jim. When you finally see him, you'll have to grovel and beg for his forgiveness. But honestly, knowing Jim, that ship has already sailed. Now tell me what Tommy said, and if he seemed happy. As for Gail, it will take time, but I think she will come around eventually." Monday morning, I went to the realtor to sell the house and was surprised at how much it was worth since Jim took care of all the financial stuff. The next day, several people called and put up a for sale sign. The week dragged on slowly. I waited for Sunday. I woke up early Sunday morning and made breakfast. purposely not looking at the clock. When I did look, it felt like time had stopped and was dragging. I went about my business to kill time, and then my cell phone announced that I had a text message. I grabbed my cell phone off the table, staggered and dropped it, picked it up off the floor, and opened the message. Turn on your laptop. I opened the laptop and accepted the FaceTime request. It was Tommy again. Hi, Mommy loves you and misses you. Hi, baby. I missed you too, just like everyone else. Daddy is still sad, and Gail is still mad at you, but Yvette is trying to get her to talk to you again. We had a great time at the zoo and saw all the animals, even some of the bears from home. Then Paul picked us up and took us to a really nice restaurant, and I played pool. It was great. After dinner, we went back to Julie's house, and Gail and I went swimming with Daddy watching us. I had to go to bed first since Gail is older and can stay up late, but I didn't mind since Dad let me play on the PlayStation for another hour. Jules' house is huge, and Gail and I spent a few hours exploring the house and grounds. Yvette found us a school to go to, and we start tomorrow. I'm not sure I want to go back to school, but Dad says we have to. What have you been up to, and how are Grandma and Grandpa doing? We chatted for an hour, then Tommy said he had to go as he was being called away. We said our goodbyes and I closed the laptop. Who is Paul? The name Jules is familiar to me, but who is he? And what is this Yvette doing looking for my children's school? I decided to call my parents and let them know that my dad still wasn't talking to me, only being polite. But my mom and I chatted for almost an hour. When she asked if I knew who Jules was, I said his name sounded familiar to me, but I couldn't remember where from. Mom said that all the names sounded French, and since Jim was half French, perhaps he had taken the children to France. If that's the case, I'll probably never see them again, I told Mom, and she agreed. When the phone conversation was over, I sat up and cried myself to sleep. The next few months went pretty much the same. I talked to Tommy, but Gail still wouldn't talk to me, and neither would Jim. Tommy said he and Gail liked their new school and were getting along well. Then, on Wednesday of the next week, there was a knock on the door, and I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a gray suit standing there. I opened the door and asked what he wanted, thinking he was a salesman. Are you Mrs. Linda Carlisle? Yes, what can I do for you? Mrs. Carlisle, you have been served. He handed me a large manila envelope and left. I stood there not knowing what to do, so I went inside and opened the envelope. Inside was a petition for Mr. J. Carlisle's divorce from Mrs. L. Carlisle, and a card from Jim's attorney, Miss Jane Wright, asking me to contact her. I called my mother to ask her advice, and she advised me to contact a lawyer to review the divorce papers. The next day, I went to see the lawyer who advised me to sign the papers, as the terms were very reasonable. And if I am right and Jim lives in France, contesting the divorce would be very expensive. Even if the judge ordered counseling, there would be no way to enforce it. I left with a feeling of helplessness. I didn't even know where they were. And then it occurred to me that this is exactly how Jim felt that night. I cried so hard that I had to pull over to the side of the road because I couldn't see where I was going, and I was afraid I was going to have an accident. That Saturday, everything changed. My mom called me excited. Linda, I talked to Jim and the kids. He said he wants the kids to hang out with their grandparents. Isn't that wonderful? Mom, I'm so happy for you. I knew Jim wouldn't exclude you from their lives. He knows how much they love you and you love them. What did they say? Jim, 2 months earlier. After Tommy had a chat with Linda, he seemed much more chipper, and I decided to make it a regular thing. I was a little concerned about Gail not wanting to talk to her mother, but hoped she would come around. The kids needed a closet change, and so did I, so I asked Yvette where the best stores were. She immediately said she would take us with her, since men have no idea what to buy for children, especially girls Gail's age. She didn't argue and went to ask Jules for time off, which he gladly granted her. He also took me aside. Jim, when a woman decides to take you shopping, don't argue. You can't win. Just go along with everything she says, and you might just survive the experience. So the next morning we went shopping. Yvette knew all the best places, and since money was not an issue, we soon discovered we couldn't carry everything. Yvette and Gail were like two sisters conspiring against Tommy and me. We'd get into lingerie stores and they'd run their fingers over the silky wares, look at our red faces, and laugh. Yvette knew a small, secluded cafe where we had lunch. Yvette ordered an escargot and looked surprised when I did the same. Tommy and Gail made faces and said, together, and then ordered brownies, which were delicious. We were there all day and didn't get back until after dinner. We couldn't skip dinner, as Marie the cook would have skinned us alive. Our shopping got ahead of us, and after dinner, Yvette and Gail disappeared into Gail's room to model everything. Jules, Tommy, and I had to sit and let out appropriate oohs and ahs while Gail flaunted and twirled around in her new outfits. The next day, Yvette took me to sign the kids up for school. I said I was curious how Tommy and Gail would do in French. Yvette just laughed and said she would take me to what she called an embassy school for children from English-speaking countries. We spent over 2 hours enrolling them in the school, and they insisted on contacting their previous schools to find out about their academic level. I was happy that they could go to the same school and see each other between classes. But I wasn't so pleased that when they contacted their previous schools, the cat would be on the loose. Tommy and Gail were scheduled to start classes the following Monday. I decided we deserved a day off before they started school, and I went back to work, so I asked them if they wanted to go to the zoo. They, of course, were thrilled and said they wanted Yvette to go too. When I asked her, she just smiled and said, "Sure." We had a wonderful day at the zoo and left there with the obligatory stuffed animals. The following Sunday, Tommy chatted with his mother, but Gail was adamant that she would never speak to that woman again. Her words. On Monday, the kids went to school and Yvette and I took them the first day, but now Paul will be taking them until I make other arrangements. That evening, the kids were very excited and wanted to tell me and Yvette how their day had gone. Both of them seemed to enjoy their school. Tommy sat next to the son of an embassy official from the USA, and they hit it off immediately. Gail sat next to an English girl whose father was in the British Embassy security detail, and they got along well. Gail approached me and asked if she could contact her grandparents as she missed them. I cursed myself for not thinking of it myself. If anyone could bridge the gap between Gail and Linda, it was Sarah. I decided to wait until the kids were settled in school before contacting Linda's parents. The next 2 months passed without any problems at school, and I settled into my new job with the help of my predecessor. I was now running the factory on my own, with only occasional help. I noticed that Yvette and the children had become very close, and I wondered whether that was a good thing or not. I decided to talk to Jules, because he knew her better than I did. One evening, when the children had gone to bed and Yvette had retired to her apartment at the back of the castle, I asked Jules about her. He said she was 30 years old and looked much younger, but I thought she was about 25. She was the daughter of a friend of his, and when he died in a plane crash, he took her under his wing. Her mother had abandoned them when she was very young, and he didn't remember her at all. She rarely went on dates after her previous boyfriend left her at the altar, he said, and was devoted to her work. He said she had taken more time off in the last 2 months than she had in all the years he had known her. He also said he thought she liked me. She had definitely fallen in love with the kids and would be heartbroken if I took them away. I said it was too early to think about romantic attachments right now. I needed to focus on the kids and my new job. He said he was sure she would wait, and in the meantime, he and the kids were bonding, and with their mother absent, Yvette would fill the void. I decided to leave things as they were and continue to live at the chateau as the children liked it there, and Jules liked the sounds of children in his house. I decided it was time to let the children contact their grandparents, so I called Sarah. The phone rang several times, and I was about to give up when a voice said, "Jim, is that really you?" "Hi, Sarah. I thought it was time for you to reunite with your grandchildren, if that's okay." "I'm so glad you called. Linda lives on Sundays and talks to Tommy. She's upset that Gail won't talk to her. Sarah, Yvette, and I have tried to get her to talk to her mother, but she won't even hear of it. Just calls Linda that woman. I was hoping you could talk her into it." "Jim, who's Yvette? Have you replaced Linda yet?" "No, nothing like that. She works for my Uncle Jules as his assistant and took us under her wing. She took us shopping and acted like a sister to the kids and helped pick out their clothes. She also organized their new school, which, by the way, they really like. She is not trying to replace Linda, just helping the kids adjust to their new life. I don't know what I would do without her. If you don't mind, I'll have the kids call you on FaceTime on Saturday morning. I'll call first, and if Linda is there, they'll call later." "Jim, that's a great idea. I'm looking forward to it." "Jim, can't you forgive her? She realizes what she's done, and she's sorry for what she's done. If you just talk to her, maybe you could work things out. If not for her sake, then think of the children. Sarah, there is no chance of us being together again. What she did is unforgivable. I won't be a cuckold. I just can't live like that. I will feel like an inferior man if I forgive her, and she will see it as weakness and despise me for it. No, there's no going back, only forward. I'll try to think of a way for you, Sam and Linda, to visit me later. But that's all I can do. Sam said you'd say about the same thing, and he agrees with you, but I had to try. I look forward to talking to you Saturday, and I know Sam wants to talk to you too. Bye-bye for now and say hi to the kids." Saturday came and the kids were all excited. Tommy went first, and Gail talked to Grandma for almost an hour after half an hour. I left them, as there was no point in staying. Sarah would have put two and two together by now and concluded that France was our new home. When the kids were done, Sam asked to talk to me, and I sent the kids off to play. Jim, I'm really sorry about what happened. I hope you know that we raised her better than this. Looks like that asshole has made a habit of seducing wives from under their husbands' noses and then harassing them over the phone. This time, he wasn't abusing that husband. He was abusing you. Thanks to you sending everything to this TV show, the shit hit the fan, and over a dozen other couples came forward. And one cool lawyer filed a class action lawsuit against Lavilliere, and the team fired him when the sponsors started leaving. I'll send you the details and the attorney's number. You might want to join that class action. We talked for a few more minutes and then hung up. I mulled over his words and called my lawyer to spring into action. I didn't need the money, but any pain I could cause this bastard was worth pursuing. Over the next few months, things calmed down. Gail still refused to talk to this woman she called her mother. Even Sarah gave up trying to change her mind when Gail threatened to stop communicating with her as well. Work consumed me more and more as I sought to reaffirm my boss's trust in me. The last time we spoke, he said he was very pleased with the way I'd handled running the factory. Production was increasing, sick days were down, and the union was singing my dithyrambs. This was because I initiated a number of changes, discarded the French style of management, and was seen in the shops asking the opinion of the workers and acting on it when necessary. I also increased their vacation entitlements in line with their American counterparts. This had a positive effect. The workers were more satisfied and felt that management valued them. On a personal level, Yvette and I became close. She often visited our company in the castle and spent most of her weekends with us, either shopping or making our social calendar. On the rare occasions when I was away on business, Yvette took over my family. She acted as their mother, and they reciprocated. One Friday night, we sat as a family watching Frozen for the millionth time, with Tommy snuggled up to Vetty, as he now called her. The movie was over and it was time to go to bed. But when she looked over at Tommy, he was already asleep. I lifted him off her lap, and as I was about to leave, he opened his eyes, said, "Good night, Mommy," and went back to sleep. We all froze. What had just happened? Gail just stood there smiling, then leaned over to Vetty, kissed her, and said, "Good night, Mommy," and laughing, went off to her room. I looked at Yvette. She was crying quietly. "I'm so sorry, Jim. I didn't mean for this to happen, I swear." She kissed me on the cheek and left. I stood there with my mouth open, not knowing what to say. Jules looked at me and said, "Now you know what I have long suspected. Cher la femme." And he too left me standing there like a fool. I carried Tommy to bed and went to my room with a warm pink feeling in my stomach that I hadn't experienced in years. Linda. I was so glad the kids were interacting with my parents, and even though Gail wouldn't talk to me, my mom would tell me everything she said. I at least felt like I was communicating with Gail in the third person. Tommy was always privy to everything they said or did. I still didn't like the influence Yvette had on them, but I felt some relief that she was trying to get Gail to talk to me. Now I knew they lived in France. I told Sergeant Malone about it, and she said I should talk to my lawyer. I made an appointment to see him the next day, and he told me that since Jim had dual citizenship, the French authorities would consider the children to be part French and would refuse extradition, so I was back to where I started. Over the next few months, things got better. I sold the house and bought a nice two-bed starter home in a gated community. Even after taxes and commissions, I still ended up with over $100,000, so I had no money problems in the near future. I decided to look for a job, as Jim advised, and found that I would have to qualify to make a decent living, so I went back to school. The other advice Jim had given me I ignored. So it was surprising that when I went to the doctor about burning on urination, I was told I had late syphilis and prescribed medication. I was beyond furious and could have killed Mark for telling me that. The doctor told me he had to report my illness to the Center for Disease Control because that was the law. I had to fill out a questionnaire listing all my partners. There was only one name on the questionnaire, and I hoped they made him disclose all of his partners. I went back to school and decided to take a 2-year night school course in business management and a full-time 1-year course in catering. I had always been a good cook. At the same time, I was going to support myself with a job in the hospitality industry. I took a part-time job as a hostess at a conference center, which would also help with my long-term plan. Jim. Sarah told me that Linda had moved, gotten a job, and was living as a single woman again, but wasn't dating yet. So if I changed my mind, she was still available. I told her not to hold her breath, and she chuckled and said, "A girl can try it, can't she?" The weekly phone sessions went well, and everyone was happy with the arrangement, except of course Linda, who was still trying to talk to me and Gail, but didn't seem to understand what it was about. After that night when the kids called Yvette, the mom, things got a little tense at the castle. Tommy didn't seem to remember, but Gail decided to do it to see what would happen. The school term was coming to an end, and the school had organized several school trips, ranging from overnight trips to week-long trips. Tommy wanted to go on a trip to the beaches of Normandy. He was becoming a history buff. Gail wanted to go on a river cruise to Germany on the Danube for 2 weeks. She was beginning to get interested in architecture. Yvette said it would be good for them and broaden their horizons, and I agreed on one condition: they would get in touch with me every night. Gail went first, and Tommy a week later, as Yvette and I were driving home. The chateau now seemed like our whole house. She said she had made dinner for the two of us, and invited me to dinner. As we got out of the car, she asked me to dress casually and not to be late. I didn't know what to expect as I had never been to her apartment before, and was a little nervous. I knocked on the door 5 minutes early and was let in. When I entered, she took my jacket and put it in the closet, and then led me into the living room. In the center of the room was a round table covered with a white tablecloth, with a service and a candle. She led me to the couch and told me that dinner would be ready soon, but not to go into the kitchen. The smell coming from the kitchen took my breath away, but I couldn't figure out what it was. She came back into the room with a basket full of freshly baked scones, biscuits for our American readers, and a carafe of red wine. I asked what she was cooking. She said it was a secret and soon left for the kitchen, telling me to sit down and pour the wine. She came out of the kitchen holding 2 plates, each with 2 pieces of filet mignon stacked on round slices of sourdough bread, garnished with sautéed foie gras and slices of black Perigord truffle with vegetables in a rich sauce. I didn't find out until later when we were sitting and talking, and I asked what it was called. That it was called Tornados Rossini in honor of the composer. I took a test bite, and the beef just melted in my mouth, and the flavor burst out like a dam in a flood. I had never tasted anything like it in my life and wondered how a mere mortal could create such a dish. Yvette grinned from ear to ear as she watched my reaction. Do you approve of it? My approval is irrelevant. This is food for the gods, not mortals. Where did you learn to cook like this? She looked at me like I was a simpleton and said as if that explained everything. I'm French. The wine was the perfect accompaniment. A light red Bordeaux with a chocolate mousse for sweetness, followed by black, freshly ground coffee. Yvette put the dishes away, and I helped her wash the dishes. She said the French never offer to help with the cleaning, which was a refreshing change, and kissed me lightly on the cheek. We sat and had a glass of fine brandy each. Then it was time for me to leave. We parted, and she closed the door. I didn't go back to my room. I floated on a cloud of happiness. I don't know how long I slept when I realized I wasn't alone. Yvette was next to me. The next day, I didn't know what to say to Yvette when we met for breakfast. She just looked at me and smiled. I instantly tensed up and couldn't leave the table to get my coffee. She realized what she had done and was bringing me my coffee when Jules walked in. Jules, it's about time. You two have been tiptoeing around each other for weeks now. Everyone saw what was obvious except you. You need to deal with this before the kids get back. Gail will be thrilled, but I don't know about Tommy. I usually manage to get some things done on the way to work, but not this morning. I was still in a daze. At work, coworkers noticed my distractedness and overly good mood, and I heard more than one coworker mutter, "He's in love." I tried to focus and get some work done, but I kept remembering last night. Some of the staff noticed this, and everywhere I went, I was smiled at and ticked off. When I got home, it was obvious that the chateau staff knew everything. A smile appeared on their faces, and I couldn't help but blush. Next chapter. Linda. Everything was going according to plan. I was settling into my new home, doing well in school, enjoying my part-time job, and learning to deal with the consequences of my stupidity. I signed a divorce petition and would soon be a free woman. I would have preferred to still be married to Jim, but now I realized that was no longer possible. I hoped that Jim would somehow allow me to have contact with the children. I desperately needed to apologize to Jim and the kids, and my counselor said I needed a fresh start. I repeatedly asked my mom to get Jim to talk to me, but to no avail. Things were going well when Mark and a few of his teammates came to one of the events held at the center where I was a hostess. It was a charity event, and Mark was trying to get back in touch with people after being made out to be a total asshole. He was no longer playing in the big leagues in the NFL, but he was still playing for a not-so-big team. He was a big fish in a small pond and was trying to regain his good guy status by attending charity events and donating large sums of money. In recent months, he lost his spot on a major league team, had to settle a class action lawsuit against him, and lost half of his vast fortune. And this was his attempt at a comeback. The press wrote that he went to counseling as a condition of his return to professional football. There were rumors that he was now back to his old life of ruining other people's lives and had made amends. Of course, the press followed his every move, trying to catch him out. I tried to stay out of his sight, but with a big belt on my body that said what I could do to help, I didn't stand much of a chance. He noticed me and walked over. "Hi, do you and I know each other from somewhere?" "I don't think so. Can I be of any help?" "No, but I'm pretty sure I know you. It'll occur to me in a minute. I know we've met before." And he walked away, looking over his shoulder. One of the other hostesses, a woman I had befriended and shared my shame with, approached me. I didn't give her all the details, only that I had been unfaithful to my husband and spent the night with another man. "Isn't that Marc Lavilliere you were talking to? The one who's so handsome he could put his shoes under my bed at any moment?" "I know you're married, so don't even think about it. He's the bastard that got me divorced, and he's not worth it. Trust me." I didn't know that, but it was worth it. He's as big as they say. Can he really go all night? He's big but selfish. He doesn't care about you, just his own satisfaction. Honestly, he wasn't as good as my husband. It was just a high to be a coveted celebrity and be knocked down for a vicious night. The next morning, I regretted it more than I can say, and now I'm alone because of my stupidity. Listen to someone who knows it's not worth it. Shortly afterward, Mark came up to me with an acerbic grin. "I remembered how I know you. You're the woman I entertained, and when we left my mansion, the reporters were already waiting. Your asshole husband was lucky. Thanks to you, he's now my ex-husband and living abroad with my 2 kids. No thanks to me, you could have said no at any time. You wanted me then, and I'm sure you want me now. What if you and I go back to my place and repeat that night? There's not enough money in the world to make me do that. And anyway, I thought you were reformed." "Yeah, I only seduce single women. It's not as much fun as with married women, but I still make their boyfriends assholes, and no one seems to care. And since you're single now, you're fair game, so how about it?" I didn't answer him but looked at one of the guards and beckoned him over. "Are you in some kind of trouble, Linda? I had a brief affair with this man almost a year ago, and now he won't take no for an answer." Mark looked like he was about to explode. "Linda, do you know who I am and what I can do to you and your career? I know exactly who and what you are, and I am asking you to leave the premises. If you persist in seeking this lady's attention, I will throw you out myself." Mark looked him over from head to toe and smirked. "You're not big enough for me to eat you for breakfast and still have room for a Dane." Before Mark could say anything else, he grabbed his thumb, twisted his arm so that Mark's elbow rested against the guard's body, and pulled him back hard. Mark cried out, but didn't move as he was clearly in a lot of pain. The guard took Mark to his desk, where he sat him down in a chair. "You twitch again, and I'll have you arrested for harassment, and that won't reflect well on the owners of your new team." The guard walked over to me. "If he gives you any more trouble, call me. I'll keep an eye on you." He then returned to his post. Thank goodness for an honest man doing his job and not one of Mark's followers. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and I went home again to an empty house. I went to bed mourning my lost love. I didn't see Mark again at any of the events at the convention center, but I did see the security guard again. We greeted each other with a nod and a wave of the hand, and went our separate ways. I still felt that if only I could talk to Jim, I could get him back. Jim. That night repeated itself 2 more times before the kids returned from their trips. Yvette and I went to pick up the kids from school, and both returned the same day within an hour of each other. Tommy was first. He rushed over to Yvette. "Mommy, I missed you so much!" Then he detailed every moment of his trip, and at the end he snuggled up to Yvette and passed out. Gail, being older and realizing her position among her peers, was less affectionate. I got a hug and a kiss on the cheek, and Yvette got the same, but with the addition, "Missed you, Mom." As we drove home, Yvette had tears in her eyes, and I was choking and unable to speak. Things had fallen into a routine, and now both kids openly called Yvette Mommy. But in conversation with their real mom and grandparents, they tended to call her Yvette. Thanksgiving, which is not celebrated at home outside the US, was approaching, and the embassy threw a party for its employees. Jules, as a community leader, was invited and organized for us to attend as well. They even took care of the kids with a balloon pool and entertainment. I didn't worry about their safety when I was alone, as there were Marines standing everywhere. Tommy and Gail had their cell phones with them, so they could call us anytime. Jules sat and talked with the other guests, and Yvette and I danced the night away, and we all had a good time. I realized that I was now in love with Yvette, but what to do about it? Christmas was only a few weeks away, and I had a plan matured to surprise the kids and Yvette. After the kids chatted with their grandparents, I escorted them out of the room and spent the next half hour preparing the surprise. I told Yvette about one of the surprises, and she thought it was a great idea. We took the kids to the Christmas store and told them to buy gifts for their grandparents that they could open on FaceTime and then send them on their way. Christmas Eve came and the kids were excited, as were kids all over the world. We were just setting up the table places when Gail said, "Wait a minute, there are 2 extra seats? Who else is coming?" I replied, "We've invited some special guests, and they should be here anytime. I hope you don't mind." At that moment, we heard a car pull up outside in the crisp snow. I went to greet the guests and led them into the castle. As I led them into the dining room, the children went wild, yelling Grandma and Grandpa and rushing to their grandparents. After the tears were wiped away and everyone hugged, including Jules and Yvette, proper introductions were made. The maid then announced that the cook was ready to serve and we could sit down at the table. The meal was a great success, and we all retired to the living room. The children sat with their grandparents and clung to them as best they could. When it became clear that Tommy was falling asleep, I said, "It's time for you to go to bed, young man." He sleepily rose from his grandmother's lap to say goodnight and give her a kiss. As he walked over to Yvette, he wished her good night and kissed her. There was silence in the room. Sam raised his eyebrows and Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. I muttered the word later and left to put Tommy to bed. When I returned, both Yvette and Jules had made a strategic retreat and left Gail, me, and my former in-laws alone. Sam looked at me and simply said, "Well?" "While I took a pause to calm down," Gail said. "It's not Dad's fault. Tommy and I decided to call Yvette Mom about 3 months ago, and ever since we got here, she's been fulfilling the role of our mother. She organized our school, picked out the right clothes for us, and listened to us when we were sad. She tried her hardest to get me to talk to the woman who destroyed our family, but never let us disrespect her. I know she fell in love with her father early on, but did nothing about it until after the divorce. Now they are dating, and I expect Dad to pop the question at any moment, and then she will become our foster mom. She loves us, and we love her. Tommy still loves his mom and always will, but he will have 2 moms. On the other hand, I intend to ask Yvette to adopt me as soon as I turn 18, since this woman will never give her permission before. This will change nothing between us. I love you both to death, and that will never change. Please don't be mad at Dad. He wanted Tommy and I to keep in touch with our mother, but after the way she treated us, I absolutely refused. Tommy is too young to realize what she did. Daddy tried to shield him from the worst, but one day he will find out what a conniving bitch she is. What he'll do then, no one knows. I hope she realizes what one night of fun will cost her." Sam and Sarah looked at Gail with a new respect, as did I. She was so eloquent in her speech, she sounded like an adult, not the 14-year-old girl she was now. It occurred to me that she would make a great lawyer if she decided to go down that path. I was so proud of her that I felt a tear roll down my face. Linda's parents wept too. Gail hugged her grandparents, told them she loved them, and went to bed. Sam and Sarah looked at me, waiting for me to speak. Well, I think Gail pretty much said it all, and I can't improve on anything. Only one point Gail brought up that matters. I'm going to ask the question tomorrow when we open presents. Sarah put her head down in her arms and cried. Sam put her arms around her and said, "We're not surprised," I told Sarah. "We probably won't be able to change your mind. Speaking for myself, I don't blame you, but when we tell Linda you're going to get married, I don't know what she'll do. She was hoping we could get you to at least talk to her. She is truly sorry and realizes that what she did was unforgivable, but she is willing to do anything to make things right between you two. Now I have to tell her that things are hopeless, and you've moved on. Can't you at least tell her face to face that it's over?" I assume by face to face you mean FaceTime communication, because if I go back to the States, I'll be arrested for taking the kids, so I'm not ready for that. I am willing to talk to her on FaceTime, but only after you come home and support her. That's all I'm willing to do. Is that enough? I understand your reluctance and see no alternative, so it has to be done. What about the children when they can physically see their mother? I'll talk to a lawyer and see what I can do. I don't want to keep Linda away from them, but she is responsible for them not being able to be with her. When I lost my wife, I swore I wouldn't lose my children too. When they are old enough to choose, and I mean their 16th birthday, they can go back to their mother if they want to. I will not stop them. I don't have high hopes for Gail, but Tommy is different. He misses his mother. And maybe that's why he's attached to Yvette. So when you get back, make your arrangements, and I'll try to arrange it. It's the best I can offer. Jim, that's very fair and more than we expected. Linda was an idiot if she thought you would put up with her disrespecting you. Shortly after that, Sam and Sarah went to their rooms, saying it had been a long trip and they were tired. The next morning, we all had breakfast and the kids couldn't wait to open their presents. After breakfast, we went into the living room, turned on some Christmas music, and the kids started opening their presents. There were the expected oohs and ahs as each package was opened. We adults opened our gifts in a more dignified manner and duly thanked each giver. After we opened all the presents and drank various types of alcohol, I stood up and announced that I had one more present. I reached behind the Christmas tree and pulled out a small wrapped package and held it out to Yvette. She took it from me with a perplexed look and began to open it. And when the jewelry box appeared, she began to tear the paper very animatedly, as if her life depended on it. At last, she opened the jewelry box and found a ring with 3 diamonds, and looked at me with tears in her eyes. And I said, Yvette, I've only known you for a short time, but I've grown to love you, and I hope you feel the same way. So won't you do me the honor of becoming my wife? She pounced on me, showering me with kisses and shouting, Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes! I slipped the ring on her finger and felt happier than I had ever felt in a long time. She walked around everyone showing off the ring, and even my former in-laws looked pleased. Tommy put his arm around her and said, Does this mean I can call you Mom all the time now? Yvette looked at Sam and Sarah, who nodded affirmatively and said, I would be honored to have 2 such wonderful children call me Mom from now on. But don't forget that you have another mom who loves you very much. I looked at Gail, who was raising her fist in the air with each fist bump, shouting, Yes! Sam and Sarah were holding hands and crying silently. I hoped out of happiness, but I couldn't be sure. At Christmas Day dinner was a perfectly cooked turkey with all the condiments, but without the 6-course meal we had the day before. Christmas is celebrated differently in different countries. In France, the main holiday meal is on Christmas Eve. Many different dishes are served one after the other, and many different wines are offered with each dish. By the end of Christmas Eve, you're full, drunk, and staggered off to bed. The day before New Year's Eve, Sam and Sarah flew home, and I was dreading seeing Linda. We had been divorced for over 6 months, and I hoped she had come to terms with our divorce and wouldn't make a scene. When I got home from work that afternoon, Gail and Tommy were sitting waiting for me. Then Gail uttered those dreaded 4 words. Dad, we need to talk. I almost fell over. They were going to tell me they wanted to leave or didn't want me to marry Yvette, but I just slumped down in my chair and nodded for them to continue. Dad, now that you've finally proposed to Yvette, don't you think it would be a good idea to move into her apartment? We'll see you at breakfast and all meals, and nothing will change in the evening in the family room. We've already discussed it with Yvette, and she was shocked at first, but eventually accepted it. She's waiting for you in your room to help move things around. I sat there amazed that my children cared about my personal life while I thought I cared about theirs. I couldn't answer them. I was too shocked. I just sat there looking stupid. Okay, Dad. Now Tommy and I are going to go do our homework. When they left, I went up to my room and there waiting for me was Yvette. We looked at each other and laughed. That evening, I did move into her apartment to the applause of both children. Things were changing at work. I was asked to supervise the construction of 2 new plants, one in the UK and one in Germany. The company was also building new plants in Japan and South Korea. The completion date was 2 years, and I had to find time to visit each of the European sites to meet the deadlines. Linda, 3 months before Christmas. My schoolwork was going according to plan, and I was exceeding expectations, so my mentors told me. At work, I was unexpectedly promoted to supervisor, and I had 7 women and young girls, also part-time, working under me. I saw Mark a few times, but we never spoke. But the security guard who had rescued me when Mark was out of control spoke to me a few times, and I learned that his name was Mike, and he was English. One evening, after the wedding reception was over, we were cleaning up, and Mike was helping us. Even though it wasn't his responsibility, he came over looking a little nervous. Hi, Mike. What's wrong? You look like someone stole your drink. Sorry, I'm just not used to doing that. I thought you might want to grab a bite to eat sometime. I know a good restaurant. I looked at Mike, thinking about the fact that I've been hit on before by assholes who knew my past and thought I was reliable. I looked at Mike, and he looked so insecure that I dismissed the thought as unworthy. I liked Mike, but I still loved Jim and hoped that if he just met me, we could be together again. If he found out I was dating Mike, it could complicate things. Mike interrupted my thoughts. Look, Linda, I know about your past and that you want to get back with Jim, but I'm just inviting you to dinner, and I'm not promising anything else. Okay, just dinner and we're going to Holland, okay? That's fine with me. When do you want to go? How about Saturday? I don't have classes on Saturdays. Let's pick me up at 8. I wrote my address on a napkin and held it out to him. His face lit up like a neon sign. I hoped he didn't see our date as more than it was, and realized I had just thought of date as a date with another man. I'm looking forward to seeing him. Saturday came, and I was as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. 8 o'clock was approaching, and I considered canceling the whole thing, but decided to go all the way as I couldn't bring myself to hurt Mike. At 8 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. I looked through the security peephole and saw Mike standing there. I opened the door and let him in. He was wearing an expensive suit, and I wondered how a security guard could afford such an expensive suit. I took my coat, and he took my hand and led me to his car. It was a BMW SUV, an expensive car, and I wondered again if it was really his or borrowed. I hoped he hadn't spent a fortune hiring expensive props just to impress me. We pulled up to the restaurant, and oh my God, it was one of the most expensive restaurants in town. When we walked in and the receptionist asked if we had reservations, I thought Mike was going to say no, but would they be able to accommodate us? Before Mike could answer, the maitre d' came over and shook Mike's hand. Mr. Walk, it's a pleasure to see you again, and in such company, please come this way. And he escorted us to our table. I couldn't believe the security guard had that kind of influence. When the maitre d' left, a waiter came over with a menu and took our drink order. I looked at Mike. He was smiling, and I raised my eyebrows questioningly. I'm sorry, Linda. I have a confession to make. I'm not really a security guard. I mean, I am, but not in the way you think. When you saw me and called me to watch Lavillieres, I was filling in for a guard who was supposed to be on site and called in sick. My brother and I own a security company, and the convention center is one of our clients. You forgive me? So why have you been faking it all these weeks? I could have been there for you and worked up the courage to ask you out, but I didn't have much experience in dating and I didn't know where to start. I asked my brother Tom and he said just ask. She can only say no and you can move on. So here I am, and I don't expect you to go to Holland. Maybe next time, if there is a next time. Mike, that's so sweet. But there won't be a next time unless you let me pay my way. I'm not without means. Jim has taken good care of me, so you don't have to worry about that. Jim seems like a very nice guy. Tell me about him if you don't mind. You didn't invite me over to talk about my ex, so let's talk about you. I know you're English. How did you end up here with your brother? It's a long story, but if you're really interested, I'll tell you briefly. Please, Mike, I'd like to hear it. You asked for it, so here goes. My brother and I come from a family with a long tradition of service to our country. My father was in the military, as was my uncle, so my brother and I joined the Royal Marines straight out of university. To cut a long story short, I was discharged after my left leg was amputated in an improvised explosive device attack in Helmand. You hardly notice the difference when I walk, and I can even dance if it's not too fast. My brother followed me when he was shot in the knee and could no longer pass medical exams. Our parents died when we were at university, and since my brother is the eldest, he inherited our family's wealth. Our family is quite wealthy by British standards, and we both decided to sell everything and move to the US to reinvest our family fortune. Tom insisted that we share the inheritance, and we started a security company. Tom runs the East Coast branch and I run the rest, which is actually smaller. Tom married Kim, the nurse who took care of him when he was injured. She was in the medical corps and outranked him. He was a lieutenant, and she was a captain. Anyway, you know the rest. Jim served in the British Army, something to do with airplane maintenance, I think. I wonder what unit he served in. I don't know, he never talked about it, but he had pictures on the wall in his office and he dropped one as he was leaving. I'll show it to you if you'd like. I'd like it to be when I drop you off. The rest of the evening went off without a hitch, and when he dropped me off, he walked me to the door and left quietly. As I closed the door, I realized I hadn't shown him the picture, so I pulled it out and left it on the table as a reminder. We went to the same restaurant 2 more times, and the result was the same. But I never showed him the picture I kept forgetting about. Sam, Mom and Dad said they wanted to talk to me when I went to Thanksgiving, and from the looks on their faces, it didn't bode well. Linda, as you know, we have kept in touch with Jim and the kids over the last few months. The thing is, Jim has asked us to stay with him for Christmas. That means we won't see you for Christmas this year. I hope you understand. Mom, I think that's great. You'll be able to see the kids and give them my love, and maybe talk to Jim and Gail about talking to me. Don't worry about me. I have a lot to do. I'll be fine. I told Mike I would be free for Christmas, and he got excited and said he was going to see his brothers and would like me to go with him. He must have seen my face and quickly added, as a friend of course, separate rooms, no monkey business, I promise. I talked to Tommy over Christmas, and my parents seemed a little nervous as they said neither Gail nor Jim would talk to me. I wasn't in as much pain as I used to be, but I still cried myself to sleep that night. I had a great time with Mike and his family. Tom and Kim were thinking about starting a family and asked if I had kids. When I lowered my eyes, they apologized and changed the subject. Later that night, Kim and I were alone while the boys cleaned up and she asked me what was wrong. I wondered how much she already knew, but she seemed to read my mind as she said that Mike hadn't told her anything about me, except that I was just a friend and needed my own bedroom. Mike and Tom were in the kitchen watching a British soccer match, so they wouldn't be heard for a while. I looked at Kim, and it was all just coming out of me. The whole sordid truth about how I had destroyed my husband for a night of lust, and how much I regretted it now. By the end, I was crying uncontrollably, and Kim put her arms around me, stroking my back, walked me to my room, and sat on the bed with me. Linda, I'm truly sorry for your troubles. But where is Mike here? I told her about how Mike saved me from Mark, and she laughed a little at that. I explained that Mike knows everything, and we are just friends with no expectations who enjoy each other's company. Does Mike know that you are still hoping for you and Jim to be together? Yes. I have made it clear that I want to get back with my husband. He means the world to me, and I will do anything to earn his forgiveness and get back to the way things used to be. Linda, you have to realize that you have almost no chance of doing that. If I had done to Tom what you did to Jim, we'd both be dead right now. Jim would have to be a very special person to leave you the means to live the life you are leading now, but I don't see any possibility of reconciliation. You have to be honest with yourself and be willing to give up Jim. When you do, Mike will make his move and want to be more than just friends. If you accept him, it has to be for the right reasons, because if you hurt him, you'll have to deal with me, and you won't like the result. You know what I'm talking about, be sure before you commit yourself to Mike. You know he's head over heels in love with you, right? I know he cares about me, but he hasn't even tried to kiss me. He's been a perfect gentleman every time we've met. I don't know what to say. Just keep him at a distance until you sort out your feelings. That's all I ask. Now let's join the guys and get drunk. The night went pretty much as she suggested, and the next morning I was hungover. That night at dinner, Mike brought up the fact that Jim was in the army. I remembered that I had put a picture of Jim and his friends in my suitcase to show Mike later, and offered to go get it. I brought it back to show Mike, and his reaction was not what I expected. He looked surprised, then concerned, and handed the picture to Tom, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Kim, seeing his reaction, quickly walked over to him and looked at the picture, and then at me. Linda, what did you tell Mike that Jim was doing at the service? I think he said something about servicing airplanes. Why? All three of them looked at me, then back at the picture, and suddenly it seemed to get to them what was what. And Kim smiled and said, "Did he say special airplane service?" "Yes, that's right. Airplane maintenance," replied I proudly. Linda, have you ever heard the term SAS on TV or in the newspapers? Yes, of course. They're like our Green Berets, aren't they? That's right. Only better that your Green Berets are modeled after the SAS. Linda's SAS stands for Special Air Service, and Jim served in the SAS, Britain's elite special forces. I sat stunned that Jim was a trained killer and I had no idea. Tom asked me to point to Jim in the photograph, and when I did, he inhaled sharply. Linda, Mike told you that he was in the Royal Marines. Moreover, he was a commando, an elite unit of the British Army. I too served in the Royal Marines, but was recruited into the SAS in my second year. I met your husband, but his name at the time was James Devone, and he was in charge of the British Army's most lethal unit. He volunteered for the most gruesome assignments that no one else would touch. I sat stunned. My Jim was a killer. I felt cold, not just cold, but numbly cold, and I began to shiver. Kim saw what was happening and grabbed a blanket and covered me. Tom, quickly get a collet ready. She's going into shock. Mike, snuggle up to her. If I can't stop the shivering, we need to call 911. The next few minutes passed like a blur, and I found myself in the middle of nowhere. I drank the chocolate and started to feel better, but now I felt the urge to go to the bathroom. Trying to get up, I told Kim about my predicament, and she helped me to the bathroom. Don't close the door. I'm outside. Call me if you need anything. I sat there, but nothing was happening. I couldn't pee. I started to pass out, and a hot wave engulfed my body. The last thing I remember is calling out to Kim, and then the floor hits me in the face. Kim. I thought I heard Linda calling my name, but I couldn't be sure if it was a whisper. But I definitely heard a thump, so I walked in. Linda was lying on the floor, and I yelled to the boys that I needed help. When they came, I told them to put her on the couch and call 911. I laid her on the couch and put pillows under her legs and feet. I measured her pulse. 75 beats per minute, so I got the first aid kit and measured her blood pressure, which was also low, 112/70. When the ambulance guys arrived, they started giving her oxygen and told her I had done everything right. I explained that I had been a nurse in the army and kept my first aid kit up to date. They thanked me and asked if I wanted to go with her to the hospital, and I of course agreed. On the way, Linda regained consciousness and asked what was wrong. I explained that she had gone into shock, causing her blood pressure to drop dramatically and her body to shut down. She was left in the hospital overnight and was discharged the following afternoon. Linda. When Mike picked me up from the hospital, I was still a little shaky, but I didn't tell the doctor about it as I wanted to get home as soon as possible. Mike said I had given them a shock when I passed out, and it was lucky that Kim knew her stuff. I apologized, but Mike just wrote it off as just a normal Christmas, and that made me laugh. When we got back to Tom and Kim's place, I apologized again and thanked Kim for saving my life. She said I wasn't in any danger as the ambulance guys would have handled me anyway, and she just saved them time. After dinner that night, Mike and I boarded the plane and Mike walked me to the door. I thanked him for a great Christmas and apologized again. He kissed me on the cheek and left. I wondered if I would ever see him again, since I had put his life in danger. I hardly slept that night, imagining that every noise was an assassin sent by Jim to destroy me. Eventually, I fell into a heavy sleep, holding the little 32 cell phone Jim had bought me. I met my parents at the airport. They were happy to see me, but acted a little reserved. When I asked them about it, they said it was just a time zone change. When they asked me how Christmas was, I told them I had a great time, but kept quiet about Jim and my reaction to his past. I drove them home and promised not to be late for dinner on New Year's Eve. I arrived at my parents' house at about 11:30, and Dad came out to greet me, telling me that Mom was in the kitchen. Dad followed me, and Mom handed me some mulled wine. I was staying the night, so I didn't have to worry about drinking and driving, but both parents looked a little nervous, and I wondered why. Lunch and then dinner went smoothly, after which my mom said we would FaceTime with the kids later. This improved my mood considerably, as I had been picking up on my parents' moods all day. When the time came, Dad opened his laptop and we waited for the notification that someone wanted to FaceTime with us. About 10 minutes later, the notification came through. Mom went first and talked to Tommy and then Gail. I cried listening to my daughter talk so candidly to Mom when she wasn't talking to me. Dad went next, and then me. Tommy and I talked for about 15 minutes, and as we were saying goodbye, a voice in the background said they wanted to talk to me. I almost fainted. It was Gail. I was so happy that my little girl would finally talk to me. Hi, baby. I missed you so much. Thank you for finally talking to me. It means so much to me. How are you? Hello, Mommy. And that's the last time I'm calling you that. From now on, it's Linda. If you have a problem with that, I'm going to hang up. Okay, baby. If that's what it takes, I'll just live with it. But tell me everything since you left. I'll talk to you on one condition. If you can explain to me why you destroyed our family and almost killed Daddy. What do you mean? Almost killed Jim. Dad doesn't know this, but I saw him holding your gun sitting on the bed, and I knew what he was thinking. Then he looked at our family picture on your dresser and put the gun away. He almost killed himself because of you. Now explain why you did what you did. And it better be good. Now I was sobbing. Baby, I can't explain. I don't know why I did it. All I know is that I have regretted it ever since, and my heart breaks at the realization of the suffering I have caused all of you. I can only beg for your forgiveness and ask you to let me make it up to all of you. Just give me a chance. Linda, when you know everything, maybe we will talk again. But not before goodbye, Linda. I sat with tears in my eyes thinking, how on earth am I going to get my daughter back, let alone Jim? Mom said, Jim wants to talk to you. I wasn't sure if I understood her correctly, and I looked at her with hope in my eyes. She handed me the laptop, and then Jim was staring at me. I almost fainted. So intense was the dizziness. Jim? Yeah, Linda, it's me. We need to talk. Oh God, Jim. I've wanted to talk to you since that night to try to explain everything. I just wasn't myself. I don't know what came over me. I was so stupid, so sure that you would forgive me, so sure of your love for me, that you would understand and take me back. Linda, stop. I'm not here to try to reconcile the fact that the ship sailed when you gave yourself to another man. I need to talk to you so you can understand why we can never be together again. When you sneaked off with Lavilliers, you broke something in me that can never be fixed, and that was my trust in you. I loved you wholeheartedly my whole life until you broke my heart. I did consider suicide, but the responsibility for the children overpowered everything else. If I had killed myself, the kids would have been raised by a whore and her boyfriend. You'd have everything you wanted. Kids, all the money, a house, and your boyfriend to spend it all on. As it is, I'll get my revenge. You'll still have the house, but not much money, and you'll have to work to get what you want. I know Mark dumped you as soon as he could, and I got revenge on him by ruining his career. Looking at the screen, I saw Jim crying quietly, and my heart clenched. I had almost destroyed my husband and lost my children, and then said something stupid. But Jim, I still love you, and it was just one night. Can't we forget about it and move on? I thought you were already living with Mike. Damn, he knew about Mike, but did he know everything? It's true, Jim. I dated Mike. But we're just friends. We didn't even kiss. I swear on my life, Jim, nothing happened. I haven't moved out. I still want you back in my life, please, Jim. Can we meet and work things out? Linda, you say nothing has changed, but I have changed. When we arrived at my uncle's chateau, I was a broken man grasping at straws. I didn't know what to do next. My life had fallen apart, and I was in a state of overwhelm. I had a month to get myself in order before I started a new job. The kids needed a new school, and everything we had was in 2 boxes. Jules realized where I was, and immediately introduced me to his assistant Yvette. She took one look at me and took matters into her own hands. She arranged the children in their rooms, one on each side of mine. Over the next few weeks, she got them into a good school that catered to foreign diplomats, took them shopping, and became a big sister to Gail. She took me shopping for new clothes so I could fit into my new position at the factory. She essentially took over the running of our lives until I came to terms with my new position as a single father. I depended on her more and more, and as a result, we grew closer together. It wasn't until our divorce became final that we admitted we were in love with each other and kissed for the first time. I know you think she took advantage of me, but she didn't. If she hadn't talked me into having the kids contact you and your parents, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The point of this conversation is that I asked Yvette to be my wife and she said yes. I still love you, but not like I used to. I don't hate you anymore, and the need for revenge is gone, but I can never forgive you for what you did. If we got back together, I would always wonder what you were doing and with whom. That's no way for a married couple to live, and it will eat us up in a few years. So let Mike into your heart, but never treat him with the disrespect you showed me. Love him with all your heart and move on with your life. And that's when I felt like my life was really falling apart, and my dad had to pick me up and put me to bed. I was crying so hard. Jim. When Sam took Linda away, Sarah took her place. Thank you, Jim. I know it wasn't easy, and that you tried not to hurt her, and we appreciate that. Will you continue to communicate with me and Sam? And can we continue to communicate with the kids? Of course, Sarah, nothing has changed. We just needed to clear the air. We'll talk next Sunday, bye. We set the wedding for June, and on our honeymoon, Yvette and I went on a cruise. We invited Sam and Sarah, but they declined, saying they didn't think it was appropriate. The next 2 years flew by. Gail was 18 and wanted to study law and become a lawyer in France. Gail loved France and wanted to become a French citizen. Tommy was already 16 and wanted to visit the US to see his grandparents and mother. Gail said she would go with him, but refused to see Linda. Linda and Mike were married 6 months ago and seemed happy. I was happy for her and Mike, but still felt sympathy for Linda and wanted her to be happy. Last year, the case against Lavilliere was finally closed and compensation was paid. We all received $1.3 million. I put my amount in trust for the children on their 25th birthdays. I heard that Linda had invested her sum in starting her own restaurant business, and she was doing well. As for work, the proposed factories were up and running, and I became regional manager covering France, Germany, and the UK. I had a swanky new office and had to travel a lot. Yvette used to travel with me and store with me while I was in meetings. She no longer worked for Jules as his assistant, but trained her replacement. The company also had a regional manager for Japan and Korea and one for the US. My income had tripled, and we were about to buy our own house, but Jules said he wanted us to stay, as he was used to being surrounded by family. We discussed his offer and agreed to stay with him indefinitely. Tommy was pleased as he was now dating one of the maid's daughters. Linda and I occasionally chatted without reproach, and on one such visit I told her that Gail and Tommy were going to stay with her parents for the summer vacation. I said I didn't mind her seeing the kids, and asked Tommy if he wanted to stay with his mother for a while if she would like that. She immediately burst into tears and couldn't speak for a while. Mike appeared on the screen looking like a thunderstorm, and was about to reprimand me for upsetting his wife when Linda stopped him. She explained the reason for her tears, and Mike apologized, saying he would be more than happy to take Tommy in for a few weeks. I called Tommy into the room and told him what had been said. He was thrilled and started talking to his mom. I left them and went to find Yvette. She was sitting in the kitchen with a concerned look on her face. I figured it was because I was returning to the States for a formal dinner and dance sponsored by my company that I was to attend with my spouse. The company was sponsoring a charity event for war veterans in the US. Other regional managers will be there as well as the CEO. It was made clear that if we served, we should wear our old uniforms as a sign of respect. All of this would take place on Veterans Day, November 11th. I assumed that Yvette was worried that I would see Linda forgive her and make up. I tried to explain that it would never happen, but she laughed and said it didn't bother her. So I asked what was wrong. She was a little nervous and handed me something that looked like a small plastic thermometer. I looked at it and saw a clear window with a negative on one end and a positive on the other, and there was a dark blue line on the positive end. I turned it over and it said, "Pregnancy Test Kit." I looked at Yvette. She looked scared. She probably thought I was going to get angry. I pulled her to me and kissed her hard, and then I cried. I was so happy. We stood like that for what seemed like an eternity, both of us crying with happiness. So you're not angry with me? How could I be mad at you? You just made me the happiest person in the world. How long have you known that? Just today I was afraid you'd come home and be angry. We need to take you to the doctor to confirm it. We'll go tomorrow, but today we just went out to have fun. The next day I walked on air, called work, canceled all my appointments for the day, and took the day off. Next, I made an appointment with our family doctor. The doctor said she was about 6 weeks along and doing well. I asked if Yvette would be able to accompany me to the US in 4 months, and he said that as long as there were no complications, everything would be fine. Tommy and Gail went to stay with their grandparents for the summer, and Gail used the time to socialize with her old friends. Tommy lived with his grandparents for the first week and then met his mother and lived with her for the next 3 weeks. I insisted they come home a week early to reorient themselves before school university started. They both said they had a wonderful time, but Gail still refused to talk to her mother and retreated to her room when she visited. The week of the fundraiser, Yvette, showing off her growing bump, and I went to visit Linda's parents. It was then that I learned that Linda would be attending, as one she was in charge of catering, and two Mike and Tom would be in their veterans' uniforms. I suggested to Yvette that we cancel, but she didn't want to hear about it and said, "Besides, I've never seen you in uniform." And that was the end of the conversation. Sam and Sarah were going to go too, as Sam is also a veteran, but they will be going with friends from the local Veterans Association. The event would start mid-afternoon with a special auction with items donated by local companies and wealthy families. Our company has donated a painting by artist Hockney that was expected to go for over $400,000, and our CEO will donate it to the highest bidder. The evening dinner was to be held at 6 p.m. It was to be a formal event with an announcement of the guests at the entrance. The announcement was to be formal. The host would announce the guest's title, if any, then his name, rank, and regiment. He would then announce the name and status of the guest's companion. I was in my uniform for the first time in nearly 20 years, and was proud that it still fit me perfectly. I kept myself in shape by running in the mornings and going to the gym 3 times a week, as well as working out at the local dojo with an MMA instructor. As I walked down the stairs at my former mother-in-law's house, Yvette inhaled sharply, causing Sam and Sarah to look at me. Sam was the first to react. "Jesus, Jim, you never said you were SAS. You kept quiet about it." Sarah just covered her mouth and looked shocked. As I came down the stairs, Yvette threw herself into my arms. "Mon chéri, you look so dressy in your uniform. I'll have to drive the ladies away with a stick. You never told me about your service. I want to know everything." Sam asked what all those ribbons meant, and I said I would tell him later. Sarah came over to me, gave me a hug, and whispered in my ear, "Linda was such a fool. I'm so sorry." Sam and Sarah left before we did, as they needed to pick up an old soldier from the veterans' home. Yvette and I arrived at the place and got in line, waiting for the announcement. I noticed several people looking at me, nudging their friends and pointing to my white beret with the winged dagger badge on it. While we were waiting, a soldier in a green beret came up to me, asked to shake my hand, and said, "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I was taken prisoner and was about to be executed when your team burst in and killed everyone. I have never been so happy to see anyone in my life, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you personally." He held out his hand and we shook it like friends and brothers in arms. "If there is anything I can do for you, just ask." He then gave me his business card. Brothers in arms. We got where others fear to tread, an address and phone number. I thanked him and he went back to his partner. Now it was our turn to announce. "Please welcome Mr. James Carlisle, a former lieutenant in Her Majesty's Special Air Service and his wife, Yvette Carlyle. We made our way down the stairs to the curious stares of most of the people present, and all conversation stopped as one of the waiters escorted us to our table. We were seated with the rest of our company. As we sat down at our table, our CEO, Chris Watkins, said what a charming couple we were. He then admonished me. You might have warned me that you are a member of the world's deadliest regiment. The rest of us don't wear uniforms as you are the only one serving, and we look out of place sitting next to you. He said this with a smile and shook his head. A waiter came over and took our order, and while we waited, I looked around trying to spot Linda. She was sitting at a round table with her husband and another couple. I recognized her husband's uniform immediately, a lieutenant in the Royal Marines. The other man I recognized as Tom Walker, an SAS officer, or Rupert as the privates called us. I had met him before when he was supporting my unit when they rescued me. He saw me looking back and nodded back at me. I now realized that he and Linda's husband were related, and I wondered how much he had told them about me. Looking around, to my surprise and delight, I saw Marc Bastard Lavilliere and a few of his friends at another table. The event was so large that it would have been impossible to serve everyone at once, so some of the diners had already finished and others were still waiting. I pointed Yvette out to Linda and told her she was in charge of serving today. Yvette, your ex is very beautiful. If we weren't married, I would be very jealous. Are you going to introduce me to her? Why would you want to meet her? It's always good to know your enemies, isn't it? We're not enemies anymore, you saw for yourself. She's just someone I used to know, and she means nothing to me now. You have nothing to be jealous of. You're the only one I look up to, and you know it. Mon chéri, I'm just teasing you, said in her best French accent, and she squeezed my hand to emphasize it. Linda. I was sitting with Mike, Tom, and Kim when the announcer announced Jim's arrival. All conversation stopped, and people looked over at each other. The same thing happened when Tom was announced earlier. It seemed the SAS mystique was contagious. The four of us glanced over as Jim and Yvette came down the stairs. Tommy and my parents had told me how beautiful she was, but I wasn't prepared for the fact that she really was. I managed to suppress a sigh, but my hand came up to my mouth on its own. She was absolutely the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Even with the slight bump in the front, she was still stunning. Against her, I was just a simple neighborhood girl. I didn't stand a chance. Jim had definitely changed. We watched them walk to their table, and when Jim sat down, he took off his beret and tucked it under his shoulder strap badge forward. He did it without thinking, as if he did it every day, and I was reminded again how lucky I was to be alive. I glanced furtively at Jim and Yvette, hoping no one had noticed, but Jim caught my gaze and just nodded and turned away. My heart trembled slightly and I felt guilty, for I was now married to someone else. Jim was talking animatedly with the other men at his table, none of whom wore uniforms. Jim got up to go somewhere and disappeared from sight. Then I noticed Yvette walking towards me with a determined expression on her face. As she approached our table, Tom and Mike got up to greet her. Introductions were made, and Yvette sat down next to me. Hello, Linda. It seems that what connects us is that you and I are married to the same person. If it weren't so obvious that you adore your husband, I would threaten your beauty and poise. I think it's time for you and Jim to clear the air and be friends again. So I sat here so Jim would have no choice but to join me. He's already sick of talking to the businessmen at our table, and their wives haven't tried to strike up a conversation with me yet. I thought joining you and your company would liven up the evening for both of us. We could talk about children and marital matters, and the boys could reminisce. If you don't mind? She glanced around the table and agreement was reached without words. She had charmed everyone with just a few short words. She reached out and squeezed my hand, saying, I hope we will remain friends and not let a little thing like divorce come between us. We French know a thing or two about love and heart. We chatted some more and waited for Jim to return. When he returned, he looked for Yvette, and when he spotted her at our table, he shrugged and walked over. He stood behind Yvette, put his hands on her shoulders and said, When a French woman makes a decision, you shouldn't try to change her mind, I know. Since my wife has decided to join you, may I sit down too? There were nods of agreement and I sat down. Jim. I came back from the restroom and was accosted by a couple of green berets, one of whom was the same man I had met earlier, and the other I didn't know, and was introduced as his brother. Although I wanted to go back to my table, I didn't want to get acquainted with other people from our company. The conversation had dried up there, and we were having trouble finding topics of conversation. I didn't want to leave Yvette alone in such an environment, so I pulled away from my two new friends and walked back to my table. When I was about to reach it, I realized I didn't see Yvette, and with a sense of déjà vu, I quickly looked toward Lavilliere's table. I was momentarily relieved to see Lavilliere sitting there talking to his friends, who all looked like football players. I felt ashamed that I had doubted Yvette for even a moment, and I realized how much Linda had scared me. I looked around for Yvette and saw that she was sitting with Linda and her company, talking like old friends. I walked over to them, not knowing what to say, and only caught the end of Yvette's sentence. She was right, of course, and it was long overdue to put an end to this story. I put my hands on Yvette's shoulders and asked permission to join their table. In response, Kim pushed a chair back between her and Yvette, and I sat down. All eyes were on me, expecting me to make some kind of statement that I addressed the entire table. Everyone here knows the story of Linda and I breaking up, so I won't open old wounds. Linda, you have caused me indescribable pain, and in anger I took your children from you. I'm not sure which of us hurt the other more. You apologized to me. Now it's my turn. I'm sorry for taking your children. There was probably a better way to get back at you. I just couldn't think of a way to do it at the time. I tried to convince Gail to reunite with you, but she's as stubborn as you are. Yvette and I will continue to work on her, and I hope that in time we will succeed. Tommy is a different matter. He feels the gap between us, and I intend to let him decide for himself which parent he wants to live with. If he chooses me, I will make sure he spends most of his vacations with you, and if he chooses you, I hope you will do the same. You and I have a hatchet to bury, Linda. I forgive you, and I hope you and Mike have a very happy life together. Linda jumped to her feet and hugged me. I looked at my new friends and said, I need to do one more thing to finish this story. And I looked at Lavilliere sitting at the table. I guess everyone thought I was going to destroy him. As I stood up, Yvette grabbed my arm to stop me, but Kim held her back, saying, Don't try to stop him. He has to do it. As I approached the bar, I heard Yvette crying, but I had to do it and get my man card back. Ordering a bottled beer, I walked over to Lavilliere's table, stopped, looked him up and down, and said, Hi, you probably don't remember me. We met a few years ago and I'm here to fulfill a promise. No, I don't remember you. Who are you and what do you want? A few years ago, you did me a favor. You took my wife away from me to a nightclub and showed me what a lying, worthless bitch she is. You sent me a letter with pictures, and I sent a letter back thanking you for making my wife look like a whore. I said if we ever met, I would shake your hand and buy you a beer. So here's my hand, and here's the beer. I held out my hand, and we shook it. He looked at me with a smug expression on his face, but his friends looked nervous. I put the bottle on the table and said, Enjoy. Since you don't seem to remember me, I'll refresh your memory. Do you remember when you finished with my wife and were about to take her home? There were a lot of reporters waiting for you at the gate? Well, that was me. And when you took her home, there were even more? That was me too. I also arranged with the TV show Celebrities Behaving Badly for them to do a special on you and your affairs with married women. You see, I was grateful to you for exposing my wife, but angry that you hurt my children who had to grow up without a mother. And guess who paid the lawyer who started the class action lawsuit that took away half of your fortune? Basically, it's my fault you got kicked off your team and the best teams in the NFL, so you're sitting with a bunch of second-rate players drinking cheap wine. You screwed my wife and my marriage, so I screwed your life. Have a nice day. He sat there with steam coming out of his ears as I left, having made my first mistake. As I was leaving, I heard someone yell, No, Mark! I turned around and Mark was almost upon me, holding a steak knife above my head. He was about 5 feet away and approaching fast. As the knife came down, my training took over. I ducked down and crossed my wrist to meet his downward thrust, grabbed his wrist with my right hand and pulled him forward. As he fell and dropped the knife, I made my second mistake. When I got up and turned my back on him, deciding he was exhausted, and walked back to the table. I had taken about 10 steps when Mike pointed behind me and yelled, Guns! Because of the many threats to Mark's life, he was able to get a permit to carry a gun, and his favorite weapon was a Derringer. When I turned to face him, he pulled the trigger and I threw the knife. We hit each other. There was complete silence, and then all hell broke loose. 5 of Mark's friends decided to get revenge and moved towards me, intending to hurt me. Suddenly, they stopped. Standing next to me were Tom, Mike, and the 2 Green Berets I had talked to earlier. They decided that retreat was better than valor and returned to their table. I started to feel the pain as the adrenaline was wearing off, and felt someone push a chair under me. As I sat down, a crowd gathered around us. Mark was cold, and I started to shiver and realized I was going into shock. Kim took charge and began to put people in their seats. She took off my tunic, put 2 tissues on my wounds, and told Yvette to apply pressure to them. Then she went over to Mark and did the same. Linda was crying and saying it was all her fault, and Mike tried to calm her down. Yvette was as angry as I had ever seen her. She was yelling at me that I was a fool for risking my life to prove a point, and almost orphaned our unborn child. Kim stood beside her and said calmly, Yvette, you shouldn't be mad at Jim. He did what any red-blooded male would do. He needed to reclaim his alpha male status from that piece of shit lying over there. He was actually very reserved. He had to confront Mark and take him to the ground in front of everyone, because it was Mark who started all this, not Jim. You need to know something about Jim, but I'm not the one to tell you. You'll have to ask Jim. I heard everything, but it was like they were far away and not talking about me at all. I remember being put on a gurney and wheeled to the ambulance. Yvette was holding my hand, and Kim was pressing on my wounds and yelling, Step on it! We're bleeding! My last conscious memory was of Linda holding the blood bag and crying. I was sitting in my car, and the driver behind me was honking his horn. I looked at the traffic light, but it was still red. So what was his problem? I decided I had had enough. I tried to get out of the car, but I couldn't move as I was wearing my seatbelt. I realized that someone was holding me, and the horn was the machine next to my bed. I stopped resisting and looked around the room. It was Yvette holding me, and the first thing I did was look at her. Jim, I'm sorry if I hurt you, but the doctor said you can't move, so you're strapped in. I'll get the nurse. They'd like to know when you'll wake up. I tried to respond, but all I got out was a moo, and then a nurse walked in. She quickly checked my vitals and unbuckled my restraints. You should be fine now, just don't move. I've called the doctor. He'll be here in a minute. But for now, just lie still. I sucked on an ice chip, which at the moment was better than any malt whiskey, looked around the room and was surprised to see Linda sitting in a chair asleep. I looked at Yvette and raised my eyebrows questioningly. She's hardly left your side since you got here. I think she still cares for you very much. Be kind when she wakes up. I know I've been shot, but why all the fuss? I've been shot before and it was worse than this. Jim, you almost died. The bullet hit an artery. They stitched you up with microsurgery, which is very delicate, so you can't move around much. Kim was the one who noticed you were losing more blood from the wound than you should have. When the first ambulance arrived, they were in favor of taking Lavilliers away first, but Kim ordered them to take you first. She must have been one hell of an officer. She scared the hell out of the medics, and they just did what they were told. She called ahead, and the trauma team was already assembled in the OR waiting for you to arrive, and that's what saved your life. We owe that woman a great debt of gratitude. We sat and talked for a while longer until Linda woke up. Jim, you're awake. How are you feeling? We were all worried to death. I'm fine. Thanks, Mike and Kim. Mike for warning me and Kim for saving my life. By the way, Mike doesn't mind you being here with your ex-husband. Shouldn't you be with him? It's okay, Mike let me stay until you guys get out of the woods. I'll call him to come get me. I'm so glad you're going to be okay. Call me when you get out of here, and we'll all have a celebratory dinner together. She then leaned over the bed, kissed me on the forehead, and left. The doctor cleared me to come out in 2 days, telling me to take it easy for the next 2 weeks. We had dinner and became firm friends. I won't say there wasn't some awkwardness, but we managed to hide it. I asked if anyone knew what had happened to Mark, and was told that he was still in the hospital in the prisoner's ward awaiting trial. 7 years have passed. Ma'am! We all see each other from time to time and have dinner together, avoiding talking about the past. Gail still refuses to communicate with her mother and is now married to Pierre, a policeman in Paris. They have just celebrated the birth of a bouncing baby girl they named Yvette. Yvette, of course, is ecstatic, but Linda couldn't hold back the tears when they told her about it and had to leave the room. I suggested Mike follow her, but he said I should go instead. He's a great guy and never jealous. So I followed Linda outside. When I approached, she was standing there crying, and when I hugged her, for the first time since that night, she turned around, buried her face in my chest, and sobbed for the next 10 minutes. Then she looked up at me and smiled. I really screwed up, didn't I? If I could go back and do it all over again, I'd tell La Villa to back off. I love Mike very much and will do everything in my power to make him happy, but I often think about what could have been. Linda, yes, you screwed up, but you have a second chance, so make the most of it. I'll talk to Gail again, but I'm not sure it will do any good, but I'll try. Linda gave me a friendly kiss on the cheek, and we went back into the house. Yvette had given birth to a 9-pound, 2-ounce boy for me, and now that Gail and Tommy were grown, he was the apple of my eye. Tommy went to university in England to study engineering, graduated with honors, and then surprised us all by going into the army. He is now a lieutenant in the Royal Engineers and is serving in the Middle East. Gail, Yvette, and Linda are worried about him to the point of ulceration. Tom, Mike, and I keep telling them that he is working away from combat, and what will be, will be. He tries to divide his vacations between Linda and me. Unlike his sister, he has never taken sides and remains a natural. I wonder if when he gets married, he might change his mind, thinking it could happen to him too. After I was shot, the police charged Lavila with 2 counts of attempted murder, and I sued him for actual bodily harm. He got 2 consecutive 15-year sentences, and I got $5 million in compensation, so we both got what we deserved. I truly believe Linda wouldn't cheat on me again, but the trust is gone, and I hope she lives a long and happy life with Mike. I know Yvette and I will. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video. Everything was a rush job. Really? My employers just acquired a much smaller concern that recently went bankrupt. I think the company probably got everything on the cheap from the administrators. Although my employer has been very successful and completely swamped with work in recent months, our management team have been in a bit of a panic trying to get their new acquisition up to speed and up and running. Consequently, we were sent there to reassign staff and oversee the installation of our company's systems. In short, it was chaos for several weeks. There was virtually no time for planning and everything was done on the fly. Right down to replacing the new owner's computer network, which was not extensive enough, and adding all the necessary wiring. In a nutshell, the 10 of us scurried around the city like blue flies during the day and literally gathered in the bar of our hotel to plan what was going to happen the next day. None of us lived more than an hour away by train, but we all often stayed in town for those much-needed evening meetings. 1 or 2 members of the team managed to escape home to see their wives and families, but the choice of those who could afford to escape depended on what was happening that day and the next morning. Anyway, feeling pretty tired, I had already been sitting at the hotel bar for about half an hour, waiting for the rest of the team to show up, when Sherry walked into the lobby. Sherry was one of the computer nerds hired by a specialized company to help set up computer systems and train staff on how to use them. And she took me by surprise when I realized exactly who had entered the bar. Sherry definitely didn't look like the nerdy girl I knew well, the one who spent all day teaching new hires how to use our company's systems. Gone was the baggy sweater, calf-length skirt, and glasses, replaced by a teasingly short skirt and a teasingly well-fitting silk blouse. She didn't look around and consider the establishment as one might expect. Sherry simply settled on a bar stool and ordered a drink. I figured she was waiting for someone, probably wondering which of my married coworkers was about to lose their way. Okay, I'll admit it, I got up from the table like a hamstring and very quickly sank down on the stool next to Sherry. "Hey, beautiful, what's a pretty girl like you doing in a backwater like this?" I asked in as sexy a voice as I could muster. Sherry turned and looked in my direction, I suppose intending to give me an evil look and probably tell me where I could get off. But then she recognized me. "Oh God, Steve, stop fooling around." "What are you doing here?" She grinned. "I'm staying here, Sherry," I said, gesturing for the bartender to put her drink on my tab. "Hey, I asked you first anyway." "I'm meeting John, one of those electrician guys, for dinner. He lives in town and will pick me up here." "I thought you computer people were all staying in Conot?" "Yeah, but John doesn't need to know that, does he?" She winked at me. "Besides, the fewer people who know I'm dating, the better. I don't date coworkers from my company. It leads to too many complications." "Ah, does that explain why you hide your light in the office?" "I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. I guess I'll take it as a compliment." "It's definitely Sherry. Now that you're sitting here, I can see your appearance and your expert disguise skills at work." "Boy, you wipe up good, girl!" "Poor John is going to get the shock of a lifetime when he gets here." She grinned. "Most of the people I teach to operate our systems are men, Steve. Let's just say they take instructions much better when they're looking at a monitor rather than trying to sneak a peek at my divine riches. Now you know the secret to my business success, Steve." "Yeah, it felt pretty damn good when I realized it was you sitting there." "Men, don't give me that, Steve. I'm willing to bet that you were watching my every move, and that it took you longer to raise your gaze to my face. Yes, I admit it, and who could blame me for that? Sherry, you are a fine example of your gender. It's a shame you don't date your coworkers." I smirked at her. "Steve, you've always been a charmer, even for that weirdo in the office. But remember, you don't work for the same employer as me, so technically we're not coworkers." "What a charming idea, Sherry." "There's just one catch. I'm married." Damn, just when I thought I'd get lucky. She grinned. But if you ever get bored with married life, you know my company's phone number. We joked in the same vein for another 20 minutes, until eventually Sherry's date showed up, and when he recovered from his shock, they left together. I bought myself another drink and went back to my table in the corner to wait for my coworkers. I don't know, probably about 10 or 20 minutes later I went to the bathroom. While I was in there, another guy came in and started using the urinal next to mine. Pretty girl, he commented. Excuse me? I said, not sure I'd heard him correctly. It's always a little uncomfortable when a complete stranger strikes up a conversation with you in the men's room. You never know what his motives are, but I tried to remain polite. That girl you were talking to at the bar is very pretty, the man clarified. Yes, it is, isn't it? Are you in town on business? He asked as I started to wash my hands. Yes, we're opening a new branch in town. Married? Yes, but why do you ask? Oh, I was just thinking. Married men away from home should keep an eye on who's watching them when they're talking to pretty girls in hotel bars. By then, the guy was washing his hands and I was drying mine under the fan. I was chronically confused by him. I tried to figure out if he was a weirdo trying to pick me up or an unlikely pimp looking for business for his girls. Are you implying something? Yes. You've been to the bar 3 nights this week, and whenever you're there, so is that little shithead in the other corner. Haven't you noticed him? No. I really don't understand. What are you trying to say? As soon as you talked to that girl, he started fiddling with his phone. What's more, when you go up to your room in the evening, he goes out into the lobby and stays there until midnight. By then, we had already left Gentleman's, and the guy told me he couldn't say anything more, as he thought the goon hiding in the corner might have spotted him. He asked for my cell phone number and said he'd call me in a few minutes, then walked out the front door of the hotel. Confused, I returned to my seat at the bar, still trying to figure out why I had given a complete stranger my cell phone number. True to my word, my cell phone rang a few minutes later. It was the same guy, and he told me to just sit quietly and listen, then told me an almost unbelievable story. He went door to door for quite some time, but the gist of his story was that he had recently been stitched up by his now ex-wife. He explained that while on a business trip, he had innocently struck up a conversation with a pretty young woman sitting at the hotel bar. During their conversation, it was revealed that she had come to the bar to hide from her abusive ex-husband, whom she managed to spot on the street before he could see her. It didn't occur to my gullible new friend that sitting on a stool by the bar wasn't the best place for her to hide. If he hadn't been so fascinated by her attractive looks and history, he might have realized that the best place for her was in a dark corner. In any case, she pointed out the marks on her face and hands that made him assume someone had recently abused her, and accordingly, he swallowed her story like a hook, line, and bloody sinker. She then suddenly announced that her husband was about to enter the bar and fled through a door at the back of the room. Fearing for her safety, my new friend followed her and quickly discovered that she was trying to hide in an alcove in the hallway. He offered to get her a room for the night where she could hide out, but she insisted she couldn't go out into the hotel lobby because her ex-husband would likely see her. Yes, even I guessed what would happen next. After much discussion, it was decided that the girl would take the key from him and hide in his room, while my new friend would book her own room. He would then give her the key and she could hide there for the night. Which is exactly what happened. As soon as he gave the girl the key, she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek as a sign of gratitude, after which he escorted her to her room and immediately returned to his own room. The next morning, he did not see the girl and treated the incident as a slightly expensive delusion of old-fashioned chivalry. Feeling quietly pleased with himself, he thought the incident was over. But it was not! A few days later, while unpacking his suitcase, his wife discovered a pair of women's underwear at the bottom of it, and then all hell broke loose. A few days later, he was served with divorce papers, and in them he discovered that a certain young woman had confessed to having sexual intercourse with him in his hotel room that night. What's more, there were pictures of him with this young woman at the bar and entering and/or leaving his hotel room. He claimed that the whole pantomime had been set up by his wife and her lover, who he later found out was her boss at the place where she worked before the children came along. Although he had no proof of this fact, nor did he have any proof that his wife had been intimate with this guy until after their divorce was finalized and they officially separated. The bastard was at her house when the judge ordered the separation. and I was forbidden to go near the house because the cow claimed I threatened her with violence. Now she has a house because I have to provide housing for the kids until they come of age. I'm burdened with child support, and the upkeep of this goddamn house. And all the while that asshole is sleeping there with my ex-wife. I understand your obvious frustration, my friend, but what does this have to do with me? I asked when he finally fell silent. Are you sitting at the corner table you and your friends have been using all week? He asked. Yes. Then try not to be too conspicuous, but there should be a young fellow sitting alone in the corner by the opposite wall. I suppose he's almost hidden from you behind that damn triffid plant. I casually glanced in the direction my new friend was pointing. Sure enough, there was someone behind the plant, but I couldn't see who. Yeah, I think I see him. Well, I don't know what his game is, but that little asshole is watching you, my friend. I'm just nodding at you because you seem like a pretty decent guy, and I'd hate to see you get stitched up like I did. You are very kind, my friend, but I do not intend to stray from the righteous path. Me too, my friend, and actually I didn't do it. But that didn't stop me from fornicating. For some reason, your wife must think you fornicate when you're outside the house. Never! I'm very rarely out of the house at all. This is my first trip in over a year, I informed him. Pretty strange, don't you think? Why else would this guy be following you? Are you following me? Yes, of course. He's been following you at the hotel for the last 3 nights. Nonsense, my friend. It must be pure coincidence that we both arrive at the hotel at about the same time every evening. He doesn't live in a hotel. He goes home just after 1 o'clock in the morning. Look, I can prove it to you. Finish your drink and leave the hotel. Walk to the Plume of Feathers. It's only a couple 100 yards or so. There are a lot of entrances there, so if he's following you, as I assume he is, he'll have to follow you inside the pub to make sure you don't slip out of one of them. If you stand at the counter itself, you can watch his entrance in the mirror behind it. As I left the hotel, I walked past the other guys and told them I'd be right back. It wasn't until about halfway to Plume of Feathers that I wondered if I was doing the right thing. After all, there was a distinct possibility that I was setting myself up for a mugging or something. There were very few people around. I made it safely to the Plume and ordered a pint of beer. Sure enough, the young goon I'd risked a quick glance at on my way out of the hotel bar walked in and bought himself a drink at the far end of the bar. He then took a seat at the far end of the room from where he could watch me. A few minutes later, my cell phone rang again. Was I right or wrong? Yes, I agreed. He's standing against the wall and trying to pretend he's not watching me. What are you going to do with him? The hell he knows. Well, just don't do anything stupid, like let him know you spotted him or chat up any of the backups. Let me think about it and I'll call you tomorrow. But what if he's, plans to rob me or something? No, he's not like that. I'm guessing he's a college student moonlighting at some dubious private detective agency. He certainly has no idea how to covertly spy on someone. I never noticed him. You, my friend, are too much like me. The thought of losing your way doesn't cross your mind, and so you have no reason to be constantly looking over your shoulder. Your red-haired buddy, on the other hand, is on the lookout and constantly scanning the neighborhood. I'm a little surprised he didn't notice your shadow. Yes, the red-haired coworker he was talking about is actually the office Casanova, and that's who I first suspected Sherry had come to the hotel to meet with. After finishing my pint of beer at the Plume, I walked back to the hotel via a somewhat winding route that took me along the river. I hoped I looked like I was out for an evening walk to get some fresh air. Back at the hotel, the guys were curious as to where I had disappeared to, but didn't question me. Then we got busy going over the plans for the office and discussing what we hoped we would be able to do the next day. Later, as I was leaving the bar and heading to my room, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that someone was hiding behind that damn plant again. Are you okay? My new friend asked, calling me the next afternoon. Yeah, okay, but I still can't understand why this guy has to chase me. You want to know? Yeah, I guess I am. Someone has to pay that bastard, and if my wife is spending my hard-earned money, I'm going to be very annoyed. Okay, leave it to me. There are a couple other divorced husbands working in the office I've been seconded to. I'll have to stay out of sight because the creep might recognize me, but we think we have a solid plan to grab the creep and ask him what he's doing without letting on that you know he's watching you. That would be quite a feat, wouldn't it? No, the boys will trick him into thinking they were hired to watch you two and pounce on the kid. Hell, he's just a kid. He'll probably wet his pants. Either way, they'll promise him that if he confesses to them, they won't let whoever hired him know he blew the job. With any luck, he'll keep his mouth shut rather than risk losing his earnings. It was decided that I would set off again for the Constitution at about the same time as the previous evening. Only this time the way to the river was by a very peculiar route, which led me down a dark alley. I confess, as I entered this alley, I wondered once again if I had been tricked into something unpleasant. Halfway down the alley, I noticed two dark figures lurking in the shadows. With some relief, I heard one of them say, "Keep walking, he's 50 yards behind you." I then continued my walk, and nothing more remarkable happened to my knowledge, and when I returned to my room in the evening, there was someone behind the plant again. "Well, it worked, but it doesn't make much sense," said my new friend's voice as I answered my cell phone just after midnight. "So he was talking?" "Yes, that's right, they couldn't stop him talking." "Well, they seemed like big guys to me." "Everyone looks like a big guy in a dark alley at this time of night, my friend." "But you just wouldn't believe it. I know I'm out of my head." "Your little tail should pick you up from the office every night. He should follow you around until midnight, and then when he's sure you've gone to bed, he can bugger off and go home." "That's it?" "Yes, he's moonlighting at the local detective agency, as we suspected. But they're not really interested in what you do or where you go, unless it's to the train station." "A railroad station?" "Yeah, you know those things go on rails." "Well, yeah, that's how I got here. There was no point in taking the car." "The best part is that if you go to the station, he'll keep track of what train you get on. If it's a northbound train, he can drop you off and go home. If you get on a southbound train, well, then he has a cell phone number to call immediately." "South, you say?" "Yes, I believe you live on the South Coast, my friend." "I want to." "But why would you get on a train going north?" "My sister lives half an hour from here." I guess that's bad news, isn't it?" "Yes, do you have a number for the guy to call?" "I'll send you a message as soon as we're done talking." "Thank you." "What are you going to do, my friend?" "I think I'll visit my sister tomorrow night." "Do you need backup?" "That would be nice of you. I have no idea what I'm about to get myself into." "Write me the time of the train you're taking tomorrow, and we'll meet you at the next station." "Also, if you see my two friends, pay no attention to them, if you understand me. They are complete strangers to you, and it will be safer for everybody if it stays that way." "Is that really necessary?" "These are two very angry ex-husbands, my friend. All you have to do is nod to them, and they'll be happy to take care of anything you need after we're safely on the train and back here." "I'm sorry?" "There are CCTV cameras in all stations now, my friend. Almost indisputable when an alibi is required. I didn't recognize the phone number my tail was supposed to call. It was a cell phone number, so even if I had tried to trace it, it would have led nowhere. The next evening, after traveling one station northbound, I changed to a southbound train, and my new acquaintance was joined by a station down the line from where I had started my journey. He reported that a young man had watched my northbound train depart and then left the station, presumably to go to bed early. I saw no sign of the two large dark figures I had passed in the alley the previous evening, nor had my new friend mentioned them. We discussed, of course, what I might discover when I got home and what we would do if no one was home. My wife didn't say she was going out, so we figured she was expecting guests at home. Well, there was always the chance that I would call and chat with her in the evening. I'd already done that once that week, and come to think of it, my wife seemed a bit distracted. She admitted to me that she was in the middle of a TV show, had turned off the sound when the phone rang, and was trying to follow the program using the subtitle function. Constance had always followed those stupid soap programs on TV, so I accepted her explanation at that point. By then, I wasn't so sure anymore. In fact, I was racking my brain, trying to remember what else I'd heard in the background during the conversation. Some half-heard sound kept me on edge, and a couple times I thought that maybe Constance had covered the microphone with her hand. She also giggled at one point in our conversation, but I assumed she was laughing at something in her soap. I looked back, but at my home station, only the two of us got off the train. My new friend must have noticed that. Don't worry, they're already here. They came by car earlier. As we walked towards my house, my companion started talking to himself. For a few seconds, I thought he was crazy, but then I realized he had one of those blue teeth in his ear. Apparently, he was talking to two dark shadows. He informed me that we had better stay somewhere for a while. Constance was still alone, but she was waiting for someone. When I asked him why he was so sure, he told me that 5 minutes ago she had opened the door of the built-in garage and rolled our car into the street. Looks like her guest intends to stay all night, he commented. We spent some time peering into storefronts in an area of town where we couldn't be seen from the road until my companion announced that the game was on. We then headed toward my house. My companion stopped me from barging in like the proverbial bull in a china shop. He pointed out that tonight was probably not the first night Constance had had visitors, so there was no point in closing the stable door after the horse had galloped away. We need to give them enough time to get a proper handle on whatever it is they're about to get into. That way we can get the evidence I'll need when it comes to the trial. My companion was evidently more experienced in such matters than I, so I followed his advice. We lingered in the garden for some 20 minutes until my impatience took over. Then I crept to the window of the back parlor. Fortunately, the curtains, which Constance had been so pleased to find, had shrunk a little when she had washed them. I never had time to pull the steps apart again, and to correct the frilly cord so that they closed completely in the middle. I never thought Constance was capable of such a thing. She was completely naked and kneeling between the legs of an equally naked Tony Copeland. He was one of our local councilors, no less, and a potential parliamentary candidate for his party at the next general election. Our current MP had already announced that he intended to resign. It is quite clear that Constance was committing an act that a certain former president of the United States called "do not engage in sexual relations." I disagreed with that somewhat. I only found out that the bastard's name was Tony Copeland because Constance had delivered circulars from his political party before the last local elections. Constance was not an ardent supporter of the party, but inexplicably became involved in the last local election campaign. I have wondered ever since whether Constance's affair with Copeland was the result of her working for the party during that election, or whether her sudden interest in local politics and elections was the result of her and Copeland's affair. I must admit that I will probably never know the answer to that question. I suppose I was still pondering the question when my companion pulled me away from the window. The last thing I had time to see was Constance's head rising and falling. As we moved away from the house, my companion handed me a small video camera with a lanyard around my neck. He explained that once we were inside the house, I should keep the camera pointed at Copeland and Constance for as long as possible. But if Copeland tries to attack me, I should just let go of the camera and defend myself. He reminded me that the camera will continue to record even if it's just hanging on a shoelace. And no matter what I said or did once we were in the house, I was not to threaten physical violence to any of the perpetrators in any way. If he attacks you, smash his head in for all I care, but don't raise your hand on him first. I will keep that camera on you at all times to prove that you didn't attack him, and I will try to keep that camera on both of them at all times. 2 cameras? I asked. Yes, that's my business, selling video cameras in bulk. Didn't I tell you? You haven't told me anything about yourself. I don't even know your name. That's probably best if you decide you want the boys to do the business later. After sneaking into the garage and quietly deflating all of Copland's car tires, we went through the fire door into the kitchen. From there we could see and record what was going on in the living room, where Copland had by then returned the favor to Constance. It took all the self-control and influence of a companion to keep me from rushing into the room and using the right boot to make Copland sing alto from this day forward, or perhaps castrato. Be that as it may, my obliging friend convinced me that neither the right boot nor the carving knife from the kitchen shelf would be conducive to my own long-term well-being. In his view, HMG's extended holiday homes are places you visit, not establishments in which you'd like to spend 10 or 15 years in confinement. How the hell Constance didn't notice us standing there recording the scene, I just don't understand. Then Copeland seemed to tire of his labors and climbed on top of Constance, though she objected, saying he hadn't gotten her off yet. Personally, on reflection, I thought it was damned unsportsmanlike of him. Copland told Constance that he couldn't hold back any longer and started fighting her off as hard as he could. Oddly enough, Constance told him to calm down, and sort of hinted that he had offended her when he did this. Their conversation didn't make much sense because Copeland interspersed almost every word he said with two words, "Damn bitch," and Constance repeated, "Oh shit." In all the years I'd known her, I'd never once heard Constance use a swear word. Usually when we made love, she'd say, "Oh God." I always took that as a compliment, but perhaps I was wrong. Copeland had been at it for several minutes when the cell phone on the coffee table rang. Copeland put the receiver to his ear and said, "Hello!" Things started to look comical from there. Of course, I could only hear one side of the conversation. What the caller was saying to him, I have no idea. But I think I got the gist of it. "How did you get this number?" Copeland demanded. "No, I don't have anything I want to report to any newspaper." "How dare you, young man?" "Yeah." "If you make accusations like that in your newspaper, young man, I'll get you your own damn job." Constance stopped her movements and looked at Copeland. She must have sensed something in his tone. Or maybe what the reporter had told him had put Copeland out of the mood for sex, and it was affecting some part of his anatomy. "Now look at this. I'm visiting a local resident on official council business. My duties as a councilman include assisting—" "That's none of your business, young man. Her husband knows perfectly well I'm here tonight." At this point in Copeland's telephone conversation, Constance's eyes suddenly returned to the mirror on the wall, and a look of horror appeared on her face. "Steve." "Oh God, no." "Steve!" she howled at the top of her voice. Constance's sudden cry caught Copeland off guard, and he looked up at her. I can only assume that he realized she was looking at something reflected in the mirror, because he shifted his upper body to one side so that he could see my companion and me. There have not been many times in my life when I have seen real fear in someone's eyes, but that night I saw fear in Copeland's eyes. You know, I don't know if he turned off his cell phone or not, but I do know that, in a panic, he shoved Constance away from him with such force that she fell to the floor, smashing her head on the coffee table and briefly losing consciousness. I must say I've never seen anyone get into a dress uniform so quickly. Then Copeland found his jacket and threw it on. My companion shouldered me further into the living room as we continued to film Copeland hurrying to leave the house. Later, I realized that my companion had led us out of the kitchen doorway to clear a path for Copeland to the garage where his car was parked. With his boots in one hand and his underwear in the other, Copeland rushed past us into the garage. Soon I heard him yell, "You bastards!" Meanwhile, my companion told me to check on Constance, but at the same time warned me to keep an eye on her while he kept an eye on Copeland. From Copeland's yelling, I assumed he had discovered that his car had 4 flat tires. Anyway, I heard the roller garage door open and he tried to drive away. By this time, I was near Constance, who had just regained consciousness, sat up, looked me in the eye, and immediately lost consciousness. At the same time, she banged her head once more unpleasantly against the floor. From my point of view, Constance did not seem to have had a very good evening. I decided I'd better call medical help for Constance, so without taking my eyes off Constance's naked body, I walked over to our landline and dialed 3 nines. I was answered that an ambulance and the police were on their way. Indeed, I heard the sirens before I even hung up the phone. Rather oddly, I was still standing there filming a semi-conscious Constance when a paramedic burst into the hall. "Time to leave, my friend?" My companion returned and gently nudged me toward the door. He also put sunglasses on my nose and a huge trilby on my head, which he pulled tightly over the sunglasses. I have no idea where he got these things, and I was somewhat surprised to see that he was now dressed similarly. I realized why as we were leaving the house through the garage. A television crew, local news I realized, and several reporters were waiting to pounce on us. They pelted us with unanswerable questions as my companion led me to a waiting cab. Some stranger stood between the newspapermen, my companion, and me and repeated, "My client cannot make any statement at this time." As the cab took us to the train station, I looked at my companion. "What you told me is all bullshit?" I asked him. "No, my wife stitched me up like I said she would." "But her solicitor?" "Well, he was an asshole. You just met him this evening." "Copeland?" "Yes, Copeland. And last week, a buddy of mine who does private investigations told me that he was contacted by one Tony Copeland and wants you to be monitored. My friend didn't like the job, it didn't make sense to him, and Copeland wouldn't explain what it was about, so he turned it down. But my friend, aware of my hostility to Copeland, warned me of his desire to be kept in the loop if you showed the slightest inclination to come home. A surprise of sorts. Well, it was quite obvious, wasn't it? It didn't take a genius to put two and two together to realize what Copeland's game was. Sorry about the press, but I wanted to make sure Copeland's political aspirations were over. I hope it doesn't do his law business any good either. Actually, once they get their claws into that bastard, I'm sure the press will forget about you and your wife pretty quickly. There's plenty more juicy dirt in Copeland's past for them to sink their teeth into. We were traveling north on the train when my companion informed me that Constance was in the local hospital. A hairline fracture of the skull, thought his companion. He then asked me if I wanted something done to Copeland when the police were done with him. I looked at him with a question in my eyes, and he explained that Copeland had found that driving a car with 4 flat tires was not easy, and he had crashed into at least 3 parked cars and ended up parked in a store window. Copeland was last seen being taken away in the back of a police van. My interlocutor, who was apparently still in contact and receiving cell phone messages from eyewitnesses at the scene, was a bit vague about the exact reason for Copeland's arrest. He simply called it a traffic violation. It seemed reasonable to me at the time. Driving a car with 4 flat tires certainly can't be legal. I later learned from television and newspaper reports that Copeland panicked when he saw the roller garage door go up and television and press people gathered outside. He was standing in the garage in his undress, and my companion was blocking Copeland's access to the switch that would close the door again. Then a panicked Copeland jumped into his automobile and drove away. Or, more correctly, tried to drive away. The brief description I read in the press said that his car was certainly on the road, but hit a television crew's van as it left my house, and numerous other parked cars as it drove down our street. Then, when Copeland tried to turn onto the main road, he apparently collided with a passing truck. It appears that the collision with the larger vehicle gave Copeland's car the momentum it needed to stampede into the storefront. Too bad our cab went the other way that night. I would have loved to see the carnage for myself. As we traveled, my companion informed me that this evening would probably be our last meeting. But he also said that if all went according to plan, I would hear from him in the future. He apologized again for the unfortunate publicity, but said he needed something spectacular to let the dogs off the chain. It was many months before I realized what he was talking about. I'll come back to it later. At one point, as our train was crossing a bridge over a river, my traveling companion threw the cell phone he was using out the window. He told me that I would no longer be able to contact him on that phone, and neither would anyone else. "Keep the video camera, I have plenty of others," he smirked. What about the movie and those two? I'm sure the chip in that camera is enough for what you need, Steve. I have plans for the records in them, and I may have to interfere a little. But don't worry, your wife's face won't end up in the papers. Who cares? Said I. Yes, my friend, and I'm sorry that's going to happen. No man likes everyone knowing that his wife was a whore who hung up on him for God knows how long. It's not good for our ego, my friend, I assure you. Such is human nature. My companion got off the train a couple stops before me. He shook my hand, apologized again for the publicity and for any other repercussions I might accidentally face in the future. He assured me that he would do his best to minimize them, but did not specify exactly what he thought might happen. One last time he handed me a business card and told me it was the card of a lawyer who was at my house. He was a good man and could be trusted. I was to use his services for my divorce if I decided to get one, and for any other unforeseen circumstances. Then the train left the station, and I never met him in person again. But I was to hear from him and see his face again. But I will tell you about that a little later. The nightman at the front desk caught me as I was entering the hotel and handed me a package marked urgent. I took it with me to the bar where, to tell the truth, I was going to eat to my heart's content. Who could refuse under such circumstances? At the bar, I tore the paper out of the package and found that it contained the packaging from the manufacturer of the small video camera that was now in my pocket and a printed note. Essentially, the note instructed me not to get drunk. I was to go to my room and make at least one copy of the camera's memory card file on my laptop, and preferably several others on whatever media I had on hand. I also asked that I not keep the copies and the original in the same place. After sipping my whiskey and ordering a chaser, I did as the note instructed, putting one copy of the file on a DVD, which I later removed and put in the hotel safe, and sending the other to my sister. I was only able to make 2 extra copies because I only carry a couple of blank DVDs and CDs in my laptop case. I suppose it was morbid curiosity that made me watch the pantomime one more time before I laid down and tried to fall asleep. In the end, I failed. God only knows what I looked like the next day, but everyone in the office tried to stay away from me if they could help it. Around mid-morning, 2 plainclothes policemen came to the office, wanting to have a quiet conversation with me. I took them to an empty office where we could have some privacy. They explained that there was a disagreement over how Constance, who claimed to remember nothing about the night before, had gotten a skull fracture, even though it was only a hairline fracture. The way they were talking, I realized that someone had suggested that I had been acting rather aggressively the last time he'd seen Constance and me together. They didn't say who had claimed that, of course, but it wasn't hard for me to guess. They refused to confirm or deny that it was Copland. It took me a little while to find the right point in the recording, at which point I asked if they wanted a copy. Actually, they asked to take the original recording, but I told them I had no intention of letting the thing out of my possession. They eventually agreed to a copy, which I made while they were waiting, on a DVD I had gotten from one of the computer guys. While my laptop was doing DVDs, I asked one of the girls to get us some tea and the officers, and I struck up a friendly conversation about the previous few days. That is, if you can have a friendly conversation at all with a police officer on duty. They showed a lot of interest in my mysterious friend. But I think it was just curiosity on their part. The videotape proved that he didn't hurt Constance either. Actually, the cops wanted to know if Copeland could be charged because he pushed Constance away from him quite violently. They said they would ask CPS officials to look into it. I think they were just interested in who had a grudge against Copland and why. They said I should be on my guard and suggested that Copland was a pretty powerful lawyer. At the same time, they sort of hinted that they had reason to suspect that Copland was not entirely honest in all his actions. Like sleeping with other people's wives? I remarked. Oh, and not only that, Steve, we just can't get a handle on this creep. Let's just say he's unofficially on a lot of police officers' lists of interest. But if I may say so, you seem to be taking all this somewhat lightly, Steve. What else am I supposed to do, officer? Lose my temper and start beating my chest? If I had behaved as you suggest, wouldn't you be leading me in handcuffs to your car right now? I asked. Yes, Steve, I think it would. The officer smiled back at me. I can tell you from experience that when the stew is spilled and everything turns to shit, the best thing to do is laugh, or at least try to. It really helps those who wish you distress. Both officers laughed and shook my hand as they left. In the afternoon, I went looking for a working phone booth and called a lawyer a friend recommended to me. He was expecting my call and simply asked if I was going to get a divorce right away. When I said I had no other option if I wanted to keep in the public eye in the future, he simply said he would get started and then asked if he could send one of his staff over to me later that day. She would need to know all of Constance's details and my personal details. I asked him if I should give the woman a check to pay for his services, but he informed me that was already taken care of. Don't ask Steve, but you'll never get a bill for my services. Someone we both know intends to charge Copeland for all the expenses, and he, as you know, comes from a very wealthy family. And he's made a lot of money himself, only not all of it strictly legal. In the evening, all the crew waited for me at the bar, obviously hoping that I had calmed down enough to tell them about the evening before. By then, they had all read the day's papers. I thought it was funny that after the first morning call, I didn't see a single newspaper tossed in the office. I told them the short version. I got home and caught Constance doing a whoopee with Tony Copeland. They asked about the press coverage of the whole thing, but I denied everything I knew about how it had happened. It was the truth. I really had no idea about any of this. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the evening when my new lawyer, an extremely good-looking but also very efficient assistant or associate, arrived at the hotel to meet me. We made our way to the hotel library to meet privately. The first thing Miss Clarkson, yes, she was one of those types, told me was that she had already spoken to Constance and advised her to get a lawyer herself as soon as she was released from the hospital. It's much easier if the lawyer himself explains to him that he can't stand on his own 2 feet. Your wife doesn't want a divorce, you know? Yes, I know. Please look at all these messages she sent me today, I replied, showing her my cell phone. Did she try to call you? Yeah, but I'm pretty busy here. I suspect that's what he and Copeland were counting on. That's about right. Copland has been stalking her for some time now. She claims he was successful just this week, but, well, in my experience, people tend to be stingy with the truth when it benefits them. Well, he would hardly go to the trouble of following my movements, unless he had reason to believe that he would get an opportunity to put Constance to bed. Screw, I think that's the word you were looking for, Mr. Marshall. Steve, Miss Clarkson, everyone knows me as Steve. Very well, Steve. But I'm afraid that to everyone but my fiancée. I'm Miss Clarkson. I imagine a very handsome man. And a very stoic Steve, believe me. Oh, I do, Miss Clarkson, I do. She smiled at me for the first time, changing her businesslike expression, but then returned to the reason for her visit. Surprisingly, she already knew almost everything there was to know. Miss Clarkson pulled a piece of paper out of her briefcase and sketched out a list of questions. Constance and my full names, date of birth, our wedding, and so on. I saw Miss Clarkson just ticking off the correct answers she had already typed. There were a couple of minor errors, but nothing more than that. Everything was there, including the value of our house, but not the contents of our bank accounts or the details of our savings. Not that I could remember them in detail myself. Miss Clarkson then placed a form in front of me that I was to sign. It was essentially a contract that asked her boss to act on my behalf in Constance's affairs and my divorce, as well as any other legal matters, whether they related to our divorce or not, until I canceled the contract in writing. Before leaving, Miss Clarkson suggested that I call Constance and talk to her. In fact, I had verbally made it clear that I had no intention of forgiving Constance for her act. She also said that I could find Constance at her sister's house. Your house is being watched by the press. Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable if you found another place to stay this weekend, Steve. Miss Clarkson had always been a little uncomfortable addressing me as Steve. By the way, your employer is doing an excellent job and is rather vague about your whereabouts. I wondered who, and more importantly, when did they ask them to do this? After Miss Clarkson had gone, and I had been secretly questioned as to who my delightful visitor was, I went up to my room to call Constance. The guys were a little shocked when I told them that Miss Clarkson was a representative of my lawyer. None of them could figure out why she was visiting me at this hour, and even asked how much legal representation would cost me. The call was answered by June, Constance's sister. Our conversation was short and concise. All June could say was that she was personally sorry for what had happened and hoped we could remain friends. She then said she would go and get that stupid cow. 4 words that I think expressed June's attitude towards her sister's behavior. A year or so later, while on my honeymoon in Malta, by coincidence I ran into June again. But I'll tell you about that too later. The press apparently learned of my whereabouts only after I had spent the weekend with my sister and her family. My sister and her husband were sympathetic and didn't pry any details out of me. Hell, they'd probably read most of them in the papers anyway. On Sunday evening, when I returned to the hotel, I was served with a restraining order. I couldn't understand what it was about, but over the phone, Miss Clarkson explained that Copland had obtained an emergency restraining order prohibiting me from releasing to the press any material taken that night or putting it on the internet. Come on! I couldn't make sense of all the legal nonsense they were spouting at the best of times, but at least Miss Clarkson got the point across to my thick skull. But I didn't do it and I wasn't going to, I replied. We know, but someone else did and still intends to do everything they can to embarrass Copland. Oops! Yes, and you can expect to be called before a high court judge tomorrow morning. But don't panic, we've got it all covered. I'm glad to hear you're not panicking. That's what you're paying us for. What can a high court judge do by sending me to jail? Well, yeah, but I told you we had it under control. Monday afternoon, I found myself in a courtroom, and a very pissed-off judge was standing in front of me. I didn't utter a word, my barristers, several dressed in wigs and robes, did all the talking. I informed the judge that an anonymous third party was in possession of 2 recordings similar to the one I had, taken at the same time. To my surprise, the police photo analyst confirmed that the images in question were not stills from the recording I had made. By the way, we are talking about 2 photos that somehow got into the hands of the national press. I believe that if Copland had done nothing, only the less reputable and sensationalist publications would have printed them. And eventually they were, along with all the other newspapers and media outlets that were able to get their hands on these bastards. Both pictures showed Tony Copland. In one of them, he was looking at Constance's naked body with a surprised expression on his face. In the other, he was just putting on his pants, and Constance was lying naked on the floor behind him. In none of the pictures was Constance recognizable. The judge seemed to have a hard time believing that I had no idea who my mysterious companion was that evening, and practically stated so. In the end, however, he seemed to agree with my reasoning. And he reminded me, actually informed me, since I didn't understand the court order handed to me at the hotel, that there was a temporary moratorium on the release of all recordings made in the house that fateful evening. Then I was told I could go. It was a hell of a struggle to get through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse. Copland was able to obtain an emergency injunction on the grounds that they were in a private home, and he argued that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy. At least that's what was said. The newspapers vigorously fought the injunction against publication, and I strongly suspect they were assisted by my lawyers. When the case went to a full court hearing a few days later, the judge quickly lifted the injunction. The gist of the judge's decision was that the house belonged to me, not Copeland, and that he had no expectation of privacy within its walls, especially in one of the common rooms. And since the people who made the recordings were me and my guest, even if I didn't know that person from Adam, Copland couldn't object to them being, in whole or in part, in the public domain. Well, I guess that's what the judge said. Most likely, the whole machination only increased public interest in the story, because all the newspapers and television news programs came out with headlines, and more than I expected, showed these two photos and a few more that appeared in the following days. When the court finally acquitted them, the gory headlines and stories attached to these photos were, from my perspective, brilliant. One of them read, "Caught in the act." Another read, "Cowardly retreat." And the attached story explained how Copland calmly dressed himself while his mistress lay unconscious on the floor beside him. However, it was obvious that whoever took the footage from the video and gave it to the press was very careful in his actions. Constance's face was either cut out of the frame altogether or blurred. I think it's safe to say that after my antics with the high court judge, things went back to normal. I worked the second week in the new office and then returned home. However, I found that I could not stay in the house, so I temporarily stayed in a small hotel near my work. In the meantime, Miss Clarkson got on the phone and told me that she had been contacted by a lawyer working for Constance. From what Miss Clarkson had told me, I gathered that Constance was being harassed by the press guys. They must have found out that she was living in June's house. Anyway, Miss Clarkson informed me that Constance's lawyer had told her that his client didn't want a divorce. But if I insist, Constance is willing to accept the terms I propose. "We told him your name wasn't Hamilton," said Miss Clarkson, actually giggling. "Hamilton!" repeated I, having no idea what that was supposed to mean. "Damn it, Steve, get over it!" "What year is it?" "Trafalgar, Nelson, Lady Hamilton." "Oh yeah, very funny," lied I. I had no way of knowing what Miss Clarkson was all about. In any case, Miss Clarkson told me that Constance was in a hurry to get it all over with. Perhaps she thought it would somehow lead to the press leaving her alone. But actually, I think the press switched to other matters long before the case of our divorce really came up, although it still got a small headline on the inside pages of our local press. I agreed that everything would be divided in half, provided Constance was willing to admit that her adultery was the sole cause of the breakdown of our marriage, and she would agree to be a witness in any further proceedings I might decide to take against Copeland. Somewhat surprisingly, Constance's lawyers asked me to agree to appear in court as a witness in the case she had brought against Copeland. This confused me until Miss Clarkson informed me that it was probably a personal injury lawsuit and that the videotape we had made, a copy of which had already been given to Constance's lawyer, would probably be enough for Copeland to settle out of court. I guess he did because I never heard from him again. The house was sold very quickly as the market was very good at the time. Constance took a few things she needed, and I put everything else in storage until I found another house I liked. But I had no time to look. Living in a hotel might not be fun, but you get used to it. Less work, no cooking, and it was cheaper than paying a mortgage. I even had free parking right in the city center. Sometimes some reporter would track me down, and I was even willing to talk to them. But they didn't seem interested in Constance and me. They all asked me what I really knew about my mysterious friend. I couldn't tell them anything, I'm afraid. But a couple of them, with whom I got on very well, confided to me that they thought there was something in Copeland that was not yet known, and that they thought it must necessarily concern my mysterious friend, and I gave their calling cards to Miss Clarkson. Although by that time she claimed not to be personally acquainted with the man either. This was not quite in keeping with some remarks she had made to me earlier in our acquaintance, but she used the words personal acquaintance. I don't know exactly. It might have been 2 or even 3 months since that fateful evening, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, I was sitting at my desk one day, looking at my computer screen as usual, when my desk shook when someone sat on it. I looked to my left and saw a pair of knees covered by a gray flannel. Looking even further left, I noticed that the flannel fabric stretched almost all the way down to a pair of Nike sneakers. Looking up, I saw an oversized blue sweater topped with a tuft of blonde hair and a pair of huge black horn-rimmed glasses. "Hello, handsome boy. What's a nice gentleman like you doing in a dive like this?" asked Sherry. "Hi, Sherry. Long time no see. What are you doing in these parts?" I replied. Sherry explained that our company had become one of her employer's largest clients, and she was assigned to visit us one day a month. Literally, to walk around and talk to employees in various departments. Just to see if there were any program changes they could suggest to make their lives easier. "So what can I do for you?" "I'm fine with it as it is." "Yeah, you'd be the first to let them know if you weren't happy." "No, Steve, I'm here to collect a debt." I have no idea what expression appeared on my face, but it caused Sherry to giggle. "Hey, handsome, you owe me dinner." "Really?" "Yes, that's right. You told me you couldn't ask me to dinner because you're a married man. And from what I read in the papers, you're not married anymore." "Yeah?" "Well, not as verbose, but the gist of what you said in the hotel bar that night was exactly that." "Yes?" By this time, I was trying to keep a confused expression on my face. "Come on, Steve, will you stop fooling around?" I can't remember what you said to me that night." "Steve!" "All right, beautiful. I haven't been outside in weeks. This will do me good." "Where do you want to go?" "Oh, nothing much. I have to catch a train home just after 9. "What a disappointment." "Dinner," I said to Steve. "Behave yourself." "Damn, why do you pretty boys always talk like that?" "I'll be in the waiting room when you pass out." She grinned. Then she slid off my desk and left the department. As before, Sherry's transformation was amazing. It was impossible not to notice her as I stepped off the elevator. I don't think any of the men who passed through the waiting room while she waited for me could have missed her and probably wished she had waited for him. The 2 guards she spoke with, both late 50s or early 60s, were clearly fascinated by Sherry. As I approached, she pulled away from them and took my hand. "Where are we going?" she asked. "First to the hotel, I need to change." "No time, handsome. We have less than 4 hours. My train leaves at 9. "But—" "No buts, Steve. We have a lot to talk about." I agreed, and accompanied by one of the guards who insisted on carrying Sherry's bag, we walked to my car. Stuffing my briefcase and Sherry's briefcase in the trunk, I drove us to a public house outside of town, where I knew food was served all day. We talked for a while and ate leisurely. Sherry was not so much demanding as inviting me to speak my mind and share my thoughts. I don't know what it was about Sherry, but I felt I could talk to her, and I knew instinctively that what I said wouldn't be public knowledge the next day. When I spoke up, Sherry took me by surprise by going on the offensive and telling me why she had lured me out of my evening meal. "Steve, you've got to do something about yourself, my friend. All the female co-workers in the office say that you are no longer the fun, loving guy you used to be. Of course, they all admit that they can't blame you for the circumstances. But frankly, they'd like to see some sign that the old Steve is still in you." "I'm not with you, Sherry?" "No, I don't think you see it yourself. Steve, you've always been fun to work with. Even I realized that when we worked on the same projects. What 4 or 5 times? And even then we never worked closely together. You do realize that for years now, all the women in your company have been turning to good old Steve in logistics and planning with their man problems? And from what I've heard, some of the guys have been coming to you for advice about their wives and girlfriends too." "They? That's news to me. Anyway, even if they are, I don't have what you'd call a good track record in marital relations anymore, do I?" "Silly, Steve. Everyone came to you because you showed them how to laugh. Well, at least see the funny side and laugh at things. Apparently, you were an ace at advising girls on what to get their men for birthdays and Christmas. And you didn't hesitate to advise them to dump those with no hope of success, nor were you bad at telling them how to dump them. Did you know, for example, that unofficially the HR girls tell new girls that if they have a problem with any of the office gigolos and don't want to file a formal complaint, they should find you and have a chat? This is news to me, but I can remember. Yes, I suspect you can. But Steve, everyone is afraid to say even 2 words to you now. They say you walk around the office like a bear with a sore head. They miss the old Steve, the one you can laugh and joke with. Look, we all understand that you're upset, but living in this damn hotel and not going anywhere? Well, it's just not right. Not for you anyway. You need to get out and, well, start dating again. There are plenty of eligible women in the office. Sherry, I think I know what you're talking about. But didn't you tell me that going out with coworkers is bad news? Besides, we're going out tonight, aren't we? Yeah, we're having dinner and I asked you out, remember? Yeah, but who's going to end up paying? I smirked back at her. See? This is the Steve that girls can't get enough of at the office. The guy who sees the funny side of everything? Even if I'm about to order the most expensive dessert on the menu. Sherry smiled back at me. I see your point and will try to leave my personal problems at home from now on. Do something better, Steve. Get yourself a nice apartment or something and go out in the evenings. Even risk asking out some of the eligible women in the office. Look, I avoid coworkers at work because, well, sometimes I can look a little cheap when I dress up to go out and have fun. Some Romeos take it the wrong way and think I'm easy. I'm sure you know what I mean? And like I said, trying to teach the average man how to use a computer program when he looks at my cleavage is usually not very successful. I've seen it firsthand. I, of course, challenged Sherry and told her she could never look cheap, and we both smirked at each other. Then Sherry ordered her dessert. Not the most expensive one on the menu, by the way. Oddly enough, after that we started talking about Sherry's life and aspirations. I learned that she was 22 years old. To be honest, I had always assumed she was around 19, which was a bit silly of me. I first met Sherry when we were opening an office in Wales, about 18 months before, and she already knew her onions then. For some reason, perhaps because of the way she dressed, I thought of her as a perpetual teenager. The first time I saw Sherry dressed for going out was the night I told you about, when she was meeting that young electrician in the hotel bar. I drove Sherry to the train station to catch her train, and she thanked me for a good dinner and a nice evening. Then, getting on her train, she said we should do it again sometime. I guess I agreed with her. The next day in the office, I tried my best to put a smile on my face when I remembered it. You know, it must have worked. I noticed that after a day or so, people stopped leaving the tea room as soon as I crossed the threshold, and the people who had avoided my desk since then, well, they didn't do that anymore and often stopped to pass the time. That same lunch hour, I visited some real estate agents and got a list of furnished apartments for rent. I guess I was still a little shy about buying, and if independent apartment living didn't work out, I could always go back to the hotel again. I guess that was the thought that was floating around in my head. That Thursday, I received an interesting call from Miss Clarkson. How's 250,000 sound, Steve? Those were the first words she said to me. I'm sorry, but I'm not with you, Miss Clarkson. Copland apparently isn't thrilled with everything the press says about him. The man has something to hide! Anyway, things are quieting down in the press, and we thought it would be a good time to hint that the attachment alienation case may be in full swing. I suspect Constance's legal advisors have also threatened something, but I can't be sure. Anyway, Copeland's people came back with an offer of $50,000 for us to leave. We discussed that offer, and now it's up to $250,000. We might even be able to squeeze another 25 or so out of these creeps if we nail them to the wall. Go ahead, Miss Clarkson, take every penny you can from that scoundrel. But preferably settle out of court. Constance is not my favorite person in the world at the moment, but if I disgrace her in court, it will not leave me indifferent. Very good, Steve. The press will probably find out about it anyway. But you know the form, an undisclosed amount. It's almost as good as if Copland had admitted that he... Yes, I was going to use your description of him for a moment. Not a week later, Miss Clarkson informed me that I would be 300,000 pounds richer as soon as I signed on the dotted line. I went there at once and put my signature on it. While I was doing this, Miss Clarkson hinted that Constance might soon be buying herself a new house and that she would probably pay cash for it. Miss Clarkson still wasn't sure on what basis Constance had stitched up Copeland, but she suspected that it was probably a personal grudge. After a week or so, I moved into a perfectly acceptable apartment. It was further away from my office, but it came with free parking, which was at a premium in that neighborhood. It was a two-bedroom suite with a large living dining room and a surprisingly spacious, well-equipped kitchenette. The washer and dryer were in the bathroom, but the room was large enough that you hardly noticed them. I don't know if it was the money Copland put in my bank accounts or the fact that I tried to take Sherry's advice. But by the end of the month, I was feeling much better, and every now and then I'd go for a drink after work with one of the guys. There were 3 people sitting at my desk: a coworker who had been with the company for a short time, maybe a month or so, and Bob, my boss. I was just showing them a spreadsheet I was working on when the computer screen went blank. After a second or so, the dreaded blue screen appeared, but it was blank. Then words began to appear in the upper left corner, one character at a time. "Hey, Steve! Guess who's buried here in the depths of hell and playing with the servers?" Almost panicking, I quickly started typing. "Sherry, I'm in the middle of something. I have people with me." Almost instantly, a message came through. "Oops, sorry folks. Official business, honestly. Steve, are we all set for today?" I was surprised when my boss reached over and started typing. "Hi, Sherry, it's Bob. Of course, Steve is taking you out for an evening stroll. That bastard doesn't get out much these days." A message came back. "Cheers, Bob. Same place and time, Steve. And remember, my train leaves at 9. Then the screen went blank again, and then my spreadsheet reappeared. "Sorry about that," I said to my boss. "About what?" he replied. Then he added, "Nice girl, that Sherry." Our new coworker sat with a perplexed look on his face, but finally asked, "Who is Sherry?" "Someone a little closer to your age than mine," I told him. "Give it to Steve." Bob said, "She's just right for you. God, you need someone to spice up your life a little." "Bob, I'm 12 years older than her." "So 12 years between friends? Jesus, buddy, you're too fixated on numbers." After that, we went back to the calculations in my spreadsheet, making small changes here and there and seeing what effect they would have on the bottom line. It was probably half an hour later when the spreadsheet disappeared again, and another message appeared. "Excuse me, Steve, do I need a chaperone for lunch today?" "He'll meet you in the reception area at 12. Bob typed the text. "Thanks, Bob." Back came my spreadsheet again. "Will I?" I asked Bob, probably annoyed that he'd made 2 private appointments on my behalf. "Of course you will help." It was a request for help, and when have you ever said no to a lady? No matter who asked you, the old Steve would have said yes. Have I really changed that much? No more than might be expected under the circumstances, my friend. But lately we have seen the old Steve gradually returning. Now let's get on with these figures. I quickly realized why Sherry had asked me to go to lunch with her. She had her coworker with her, who I assume had ambitions of his own. He was certainly annoyed that I was interfering with his work during their lunch break. I would say he was also disappointed to learn that Sherry and I were having dinner together in the evening, and therefore would not be traveling back with him on the same train. Sherry tried to stay on the opposite side of the table from his work colleague. Frankly, it surprised me that he didn't know what he was talking about. But maybe he was thinking too much about himself and his charms, as some young men tend to do. Later, I went down to the back, where the company's servers lived, and had a few words with him when Sherry wasn't around. As I walked back up to my floor, it struck me that it had been a long time since I'd had a conversation like this with any of the gigolos in the building. When I met her in the reception area, Sherry looked as ravishing as she usually did after hours. That evening, another guard took the honor of carrying her briefcase to my car. Sherry told me that her coworker at work that day was the new guy in her company, but he knew her from college. Or rather, was well aware of what Sherry looked like in civvies, as she liked to call them. She also thanked me for everything I'd said to him this afternoon. That evening, we, or rather Sherry, did a little shopping and then had a quick bite to eat at a fast food joint. I was feeling pretty tired after walking through all those damn clothing stores as I put Sherry on her train that evening. Is it really so necessary for women to try on every article of clothing that catches their eye? I suppose I enjoyed watching Sherry come out of the locker room to ask me how she looked in what seemed to be increasingly shorter skirts. You know, guys, there comes a point when you have to take the bull by the horns and say that a skirt borders on obscenity. And then what do? They buy it! You know, if I had realized this a little earlier, I wouldn't have been so hungry when we finally hit that fast food joint. Over the next 6 months, my divorce became final, and I began to adjust to living on my own. I dated the guys from the office from time to time, but most of them were young and on the prowl. Don't think I wasn't looking, because I was. It's just that I couldn't find anyone who, well, piqued my interest. My dates with Sherry had become routine. Don't think there was anything romantic about them, because there wasn't. Sherry would tell me how her life was going and ask me what I did in my spare time. Often she chided me for not asking this or that woman out when I mentioned them. Sherry seemed to think that if I mentioned a woman, I must be attracted to her. In a way that was true, but I couldn't find it in me to start dating again. I felt I was too old. When I mentioned this to Sherry, she started teasing me, calling me an old man. The morning after Sherry's fall, as I was walking to the office, a newspaper headline caught my eye. It turned out that Copeland had been arrested the day before. I bought a copy and tried to read it as best I could as I went along. As is usually the case in judicially ruled Britain, the accompanying article didn't say much. Only that Copeland had been arrested and charged with conspiracy and perverting the course of justice. The article went on to list a whole bunch of other people from around the country who had also been arrested. One young woman was charged with perjury, on multiple counts. 5 women, described as ex-spouses, were arrested and charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice. The newspaper article mentioned that several other ex-spouses were believed to have fled the country, and extradition papers were being prepared at the time of going to press. 7 other people were charged with various offenses, including conspiracy, aiding, and abetting. The article went on to say that 12 ex-husbands deferred payment in divorce. As I understand it, this means they will be reassessed at the conclusion of the above cases. I can't claim to have followed the developments, but the gist of it was that the same young woman was appearing in numerous divorce cases around the country, claiming to have had an affair with her husbands, and in one case, her wife. In each case, the reporter cited a story very similar to what my mysterious friend had told me all those months ago, and in each case, a fairly large sum of money was involved in the settlement. Eventually, I saw my mysterious friend again. He was in the background of a news movie on television. The reporter stood on the steps of the High Court in London and announced that Copeland and his conspirators had been found guilty on all counts. The next day, Sherry came down again. I thought this was somewhat unusual because she usually came in on Thursdays, and today was Tuesday. What's more, she stopped by my department and waved a pair of theater tickets in my face. "What are your plans for this evening, Steve?" "Well, it's nothing much." "Okay, you can take me to dinner and then I'll take you to the show." "You'll miss the train home," I remarked. "No, I don't. There's one that leaves just after midnight. I'll catch it." After a few seconds, she added, "The last bus will be leaving by now, but Daddy will pick me up from the station." Dinner was delicious and the show was good. All in all, it was a great evening until we arrived at the train station. We both looked at the departure screen, and it turned out that there were no trains northbound until 5 in the morning. Sherry walked over to the schedule and cursed. She was wrong. All the previous trains had left a few minutes after 1 o'clock. The last one was leaving 10 minutes before 12 for some reason. "Screw me," she said. "I'll have to stay." "I'll call my old hotel and see if they have a room available," I offered. "Don't be silly, Steve. I'll lie down on your couch and catch an early train in the morning." Yes, we argued about it. But I didn't see anything wrong with her staying in my apartment if she wanted to, so we didn't make a fuss about it. No, we argued about which one of us would take the couch, and I tried to play the gentleman. In the end, Sherry outweighed all my arguments, saying she'd rather sleep on the bench at the train station than force me out of my bed. Back at the apartment, I found a spare sheet and decided to bed Sherry, using as a blanket my old sleeping bag that I kept in the car just in case. Don't forget that I had to dry it in the dryer for 20 minutes. It had been in the trunk for a very long time. While the dryer worked its wonders, Sherry and I had tea and she took a good look around my apartment. Sherry had looked in my apartment a couple of times before, when we took home frozen food and other things I'd bought to put in the freezer. While she showered, I set up what I thought was a damn uncomfortable bed on the couch. For a short time, the heated discussion about which of us would sleep on it went back up, until Sherry repeated her threat to go back to the station. After showering, we said goodnight to each other, and I headed to my bedroom. I don't know what time it was when something woke me up. Yes, there was no doubt about it. Someone was blowing gently in my left ear. Sherry? I asked. Yes, Steve? Looks like you're in the wrong bed, young lady. Are you objecting, old man, or just stating a fact? Stating a fact, I think? Good. But Sherry? Steve! If you say one word about the 12-year age difference between us, well, we're not going to start our married life on a very good foot, are we? Conjugal life? Yes, now come on, show me what an old man can do. I wasn't surprised when Sherry didn't rush to the train first thing. I'd already realized that she'd set me up quite effectively. As we walked to the office, Sherry explained that she was taking 4 days off to train a new set of employees in the accounts department. In fact, she didn't go home until Sunday night of that week. And she also informed me that her company had an opening that could be filled almost permanently by someone who worked at mine. Not full-time, of course, just 3 days a week, and it will be very flexible. No problem taking the kids to school and things like that, added Sherry. Kids! I gasped. Of course I want at least 2, and you'll make a great father, Steve. Gosh, that's all right then. For one awful minute, I thought you were going to say 12. See, that's what I like about you. You always see the bright side in everything. We were on our honeymoon. It was the time between sessions when you lay in each other's arms, too excited to sleep, but too tired to go again. For now. Sherry, I asked, how long were you going to be my wife? That's a good question, old man. I suppose you could say I saw a headline in the papers about your first wife and that Copeland fellow. Oh, so early? Yes. But if you were to accuse me of conniving, you might even question my motives for encouraging that fellow John to pick me up for dinner that night at the very hotel I'd chosen. I've had my eye on you for a long time. I'm going to have to keep an eye on you, aren't I? Yes, old fellow, but don't take me for Constance. I know what I want when I see it, and I'll never do anything that might mean risking losing it. Epilogue. Well, I've already mentioned that in Malta, Sherry and I ran into a very surprised June, so I suppose I should tell you what she told me. June said that she thought there was a hidden submissive streak in Constance that Copeland had somehow recognized and picked up on. June noted that reading the newspapers, she had concluded that many of the women involved in his divorce proceedings seemed to be under some sort of male influence. I have not been following the details of this case, so this was news to me. June said they all seemed to want to take full responsibility for everything, although Copeland was the only person featured in each case. I don't know what this man has, but he can get some women around his finger, June told me. But Constance has turned against Copeland and sued him, hasn't she? Remarked I. Constance is my little sister, Steve. I have always taken care of her, and perhaps that is my fault. Perhaps the fact is that Constance has always been subject to my wishes. I pushed her into that trial. I don't think she would have had the guts to see it through if it hadn't been for me. Fortunately, Copeland relented and made an out-of-court settlement. I don't know how Constance would have behaved if they had been in the courtroom. By the way, is this your new fiancée, Steve? Of course. Sherry chased me and caught me. She made a very good choice. June smiled back at me. That's it? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.